Okay, welcome. Welcome to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners meeting for 1 p.m. Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back after a 4th of July weekend. Kind of spread us out here, being wanting to start on the weekend maybe, but then Monday came and then Tuesday was the 4th of July. So we do have a request for citizen input. Mr. Carl Shoemaker. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Shoemaker. I live in Bend. It is so hard to get affirmative action. SCOTUS has screwed us again. Overthrown by the corrupt corporate-run SCOTUS by power, madness, narcotized with their dark, nefarious design. It is all part of the Republican plan. Plain and simple, you will see, alas, to bring us a bad fate. They have set our destiny. Conclave of criminals, one and all, the rich, the white, the privileged class, by those already advantaged, are at war against the poor, the black, the Hispanic dreamer. It is the authoritarian right-wing schemer. On their way, they hope to school for those that want to go to college. Oh, how much they want to learn. All of those who seek for knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else with citizen input? Oh, yeah, please join us. Good timing.
Tony Williams, 55801 Blue Eagle Road, Bend 07. Also the representative for the South County on the Planning Commission.
Thanks for joining us.
I was a little disappointed that the Mule Deal Winter Range was not expanded, but I do hope that the commissioners decide to have a stakeholder committee to research it a little further.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Tony.
Is there anyone online? So we have a raised hand feature. Thank you. Okay. Doreen, you may be able to speak now. Sometimes we try to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. Good afternoon, commissioners. I wanted to once again Bend Municipal Airport, and I have sent you a couple emails this week about the very aggressive and very low flight of the flight schools and a few other aviators, but specifically the flight schools, and destruction, again, of trees, with wingtip vortices, and just damage, and being out in the field, having S-shaped patterns going over the top of us. And if we're in the house, it's here. And, I've been talking to you guys for a year about hearing shooting that is not consistent with shooting golfers or target practice. And so with the whole field cut down and all the hay down, we have not one hawk, not one eagle, not one falcon, nothing, maybe a dozen blackbirds out there. And our field's usually covered in birds during cutting. Like, the illegal activity going on to clear the skies, needs to be addressed and looked into. And I don't know why this is being ignored. And I don't know why you're ignoring me on how this airport is behaving. Anybody can drive down Powell Butte Highway and see the damage that is being done, or go out to Mayfield Ponds or out to the Badlands. There's so much damage occurring from this flight activity, and you guys continue to abandon the citizens of this county to aviation benefactors who the public pays a lot of money to keep their facilities shiny with new stuff coming in, and a tower will not fix it at all. You can look at Hillsborough, who has one of the highest incursion rates in the Pacific Northwest, and their tower, General Aviation. It just isn't going to help. It's just going to help the private aviation benefactors some more. So thank you. Please help us. Please, please, please. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. Is
Thank you, Doreen.
there anyone else? Okay, seeing none, next item is consent agenda.
So move.
Second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair will vote yes. At this time, item number 8, public hearing and board order considering the annexation of the Bend Park and Recreation District.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Dave Doyle, County Council. This is the time for the public hearing to annex a property into the Bend Park and Recreation District. The property owner has made the request. It's been approved by the various agencies, including county departments. This would be when you would open the public hearing, call for any testimony. And then afterwards, I would ask you consider approving board order 2023-024.
Okay, so this is a public hearing on the matter. So this is 4.77 acres on Cabin Lane into the Bend Park and Recreation District for the Atias name. Is there anyone here to testify in the matter? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on this matter. And there's a board order. The Park District acknowledged it and all of our departments. So the package is complete from our point of view.
Right. Now, as we've discussed, this is sort of an anomaly in state statute that requires this to be run through the county commissioners. I think it's a dated process that one day might get changed, but for the time being, it comes through you.
That's how we do it. Okay. Is there any discussion or a motion?
I guess the one question I have is, so this property is immediately adjacent to the Park District boundary currently.
The current, yeah, it's contiguous.
Yeah, thank you. No other questions.
Or motion?
So,
Order number.
oh, yes. So move, the board approval of board order number 2023-024, annexing 4.77 acres on Cabin Lane into the Bend Park and Recreation District.
Second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. First business of the new fiscal year. Item number 9, document for a collective bargaining agreement between Deschutes County and the Federation of Oregon Parole and Probation Officers.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Deputy County Administrator Whitney Hale.
Chris Bell from Legal.
We're pleased to present you with a collective bargaining agreement with the Federation of Oregon Parole and Probation Officers. We've met with the board several times in executive session over the past few months, so I know you're familiar with this agreement. The union has voted to ratify a 3-year agreement. During this process, FAPO's bargaining team included Rachel Strickland, Catherine Lowry, Paula Fata, and attorney Seth Davis. The county's bargaining team included Chris, myself, Community Justice Director Devi Holcomb, who I believe has joined us by Zoom, Deputy Director Tanner Wark, HR Manager Jason Bavuso, Budget Manager Dan Emerson. The agreement before the board today includes a standard COLA range that matches our other agreements of 1 to 4, dependent on CPI. It also includes increases in certification and instructor pay. We want to thank FAPO's bargaining team for their collaboration throughout this process. And with that, the team recommends approving document 23668, which is the collective bargaining agreement.
Very good. Is there anybody from FAPO here or?
There is not. I think, unfortunately, we were attempting to get this before the board as soon as we could. And so I don't think that the members of the team were able to make it today.
Well, yeah, let's acknowledge it. Thank you for the effort on both sides. We've got multiple represented groups here and we're working through them one at a time for a few that have expired at the end of this last fiscal year. So it's exciting to be able to bring them back today. Any other thoughts, commissioners?
The 4%, the cost of living, what is the actual number projected to be?
I don't.
Do we know? I mean, do we
don't
have any
that
clue?
Off the top of my head, I'm sure Dan Emerson does. I know he'll be before the board later today, so I'm happy to ask Dan to share that with you when he's before you later today, if that works for you, Commissioner Dare.
Yeah, that, I just was wondering. I mean, I know 4% is the maximum,
Mhm.
but,
What's
okay.
the number that, the real market number?
Right. I remember last year Social Security had the highest raise and what is it, like 40 years? So,
Yep,
okay.
I'm happy. I'll follow up with Dan and I'm sure he'll follow up with the board later today.
All right. No, thank you for, negotiating and 3-year contract. That's excellent news.
Mhm. I would just say that if the parole and probation officers are happy with this contract and have voted to approve, then I think this is an excellent way for us to show our respect and appreciation for the hard work that they do.
Great. Is there a motion?
I move board signature of document number 2023-668, the Federation of Oregon Parole and Probation Officers Labor Agreement for 2023 to 2026.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so for discussion, yeah, a special thank you for everybody that's represented by this group, but also the partnership in serving the people. Any other discussion?
No.
Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. There we go.
Commissioners.
Thank you. Item number 10, a notice of intent to award contract for paving of Butler Market Road. So we put a couple road department items all together.
Pinch hitting for Cody Smith.
All right. I bet you can handle it.
I don't know. Big shoes to fill. Good afternoon, board. Chris Doty, Road Department. Road Department recently opened bids for paving work on Butler Market Road between Hamehook and Powell Butte Highway, as well as Dickey Road. This paving was originally scheduled to occur with the upcoming roundabout project that's under design. However, due to the amount of significant potholing we experienced over the last winter, it's forced us to really move it up on the schedule so we can do it this summer. Not sure the road would make it through another winter like that. We received 2 bids. High Desert Ag and Paving was the low bid in the amount of $1,494,879. So we're here to request chair signature of document 2023-413, which authorizes issuance of the intent to award letter to High Desert Ag and Paving.
Great.
Questions?
Thank you. Just always interesting seeing the engineering estimate and the numbers around it. So it looks like it's dialed in pretty close because one's a little above and the one's a little below.
Yeah, things have stabilized a little bit, so we're happy to see that.
So why do potholes get so bad this winter? I was just wondering. I mean, I know it went on for 6.5 months, but
Yeah.
do you have any feedback? Because I sent you a couple of messages about them.
Yes, no, the one thing I've noticed is it's not just us, they seem to be affecting pavements, no matter what jurisdiction you're in. I think we just had a unique combination of freeze thaw. And of course, when that happens, water gets down in pavement, freezes, expands, creates the pothole, and then, the thaw compresses it, and it just kept occurring over and over again. And so we had really bad potholing on this piece of Butler Market, on Old Ben Redmond, South Canal Boulevard, significant, Rickard Road and others. And so we are moving up these projects to try to get as much done this paving season on some of these roads than we would had planned otherwise. But this should, we'll grind off the pavement, put back new pavement. And so that deficient piece, will be taken out. And so we should have a good foundation to work on.
Mhm. Is
Thank you.
there a motion?
Yes. So move chair signature of document number 2023-413.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Okay, so we're rolling right through our schedule. I see you walked in right in time. We're
Oh, boy.
20 minutes early. So item number 11, IGA with Oregon Department of Transportation for a Lower Bridgeway project.
So before you board is document 2023-588. This is an IGA with ODOT and the Central Oregon Irrigation District to provide ODOT with permission to perform work in county right of way and also COID easement in association with the upcoming Terrebonne work, specifically the widening of the canal crossing on Smith Rock Way to accommodate bikeways and sidewalks. We'll probably see other types of agreements like this as we roll into the buildup of the project. This one is specific to a couple locations where COID has their facilities. The US 97 Terrebonne project is scheduled to go to bid this fall with construction commencement in the spring of 2024. So that's been the schedule for some time now, and there's nothing that indicates that's going to slip anymore, but never know.
Yeah. So yeah, this is basically just a small piece of a bigger project, but it's one of the first ones that we're seeing. It's pretty exciting seeing the actions happening on a big project we've been talking about for many, many years. One question, it talks about upon completion, the county will continue to maintain the lateral canal crossing pipe. So can you explain that? I mean, when something's under the road, we're responsible for it, or how is that? Generally?
Yeah, so in this case, COID was there first. And so the crossing it requires piping or a bridge. And essentially the county has to maintain that, just like we have, that existing crossing, for some time.
Okay.
So COID has a superior easement right there, and we are required to.
Okay, yeah. So I guess just the words I was reading it. So we're maintaining the crossing over the right of way of the water right of way.
Correct.
That's how it reads. Okay.
The pipe.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. And so this is just a relationship with ODOT.
And COID. Yeah. Move approval of document number 2023-588.
A second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
and Chair will vote yes. Thank you.
Chris, when you were talking about the Terrebonne project, you mean the big project on 97 is what you're
Correct.
referring to. It's going out to bid this fall and starting spring.
That's correct. That's.
Okay.
current
And the
schedule.
septic system that those pipes, that design is all going to be flowed in together, correct?
So any new pavement in Terrebonne that's a part of that sanitary district will have pressure sewer underneath it so that we don't have to cut new pavement to accommodate any future sewer project in Terrebonne. So, yeah, there's still a long ways to go to get it out to the treatment plant, City of Redmond's treatment plant. A lot of the other roads and streets in Terrebonne that would need, the pressure line, but at least we're able to do what we can under new pavement while this other project's going on.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 12, submittal of a Safe Streets for All grant application for the Deschutes County Transportation Safety Action Plan update.
Right. So the Safe Streets for All program is a federal funding opportunity established by the bipartisan infrastructure law that provides funding for communities to prepare transportation safety action plans, or TSAPs, and then to implement projects within their existing transportation safety action plans. Deschutes County prepared the initial county TSAP in 2019, so we're kind of a little bit ahead of the curve there. The TSAP evaluated transportation system crash trends for the study period of 2011 to 2016. That was the best available data at the time. Identified a broad range of recommended treatments, projects, policies, programs to reduce and eliminate crashes. Most of the top crash sites identified in the 2019 TSAP have been mitigated, or we have projects completed or planned in the next 5 years in our CIP document. So with this, road department staff is seeking board approval to submit a grant application for the current round of the Safe Streets for All funding to update our existing TSAP. And we have goals associated with that. I want to document the actions taken since the last TSAP was published. We want to update county crash data summary and specific mitigation measures and really update that data. We're working 2011 to 2016. Now we can bring in a new slug of what's happening in the system and make other choices. I want to review systemic solutions, speed management toolbox, non-infrastructure measures, and update those items as appropriate. We want to evaluate the effectiveness and the performance measures in the TSAP. And then a couple things that we're adding to this scope that are unique, that aren't updated from prior. We want to do safety audits of all the rural school zones we have adjacent to the county system. It's kind of a precursor to a safe routes application, and work with schools to improve bike and pedestrian safety in and around the schools. And then finally, an equity analysis regarding transportation safety in rural communities. So equity is a big thing now in transportation investment from the state and federal funding agencies. And we don't have a good idea of what that means for Deschutes County. And so we're seeking to, try to understand that better by having within this TSAP, equity, underserved areas historically based on socioeconomic factors and other factors. So from that, we hope to have a good, the ability to apply for projects, and be more successful in the future. Speaking of unsuccessful projects, in the prior round, we did apply for an actual project from our 2019 TSAP, and we were unsuccessful in that. Apologies, Commissioner.
I was
US
going to say,
20
is that Friar Road?
US
Yes.
20 in prior year was not.
I was going to say something.
Was not awarded a project. We did debrief with the Federal Highway Administration and determined that it was not, it would not continue to be a viable candidate based on their application criteria, some of which is that equity piece as well. So that said, 100% of the Transportation Safety Action Plan projects that were proposed in this last go around with SS4A, the planning part of it, were approved. So we're fairly confident that we have a great shot at updating our TSAP through this grant process.
So are you saying we're going to have to find the funding for Friar somewhere else?
Yes. No, not through this program,
Really?
regrettably.
Yeah, I know. Weren't there like a lot of accidents? Yes.
There were a couple criteria, the equity piece, but also compared to other locations, it did not have the crash issues compared to other applications that they reviewed. And they awarded a lot of planning dollars in the first go around, not so much infrastructure. However, just based on its position, it was not a viable project, and no sense in submitting it again in this program, at least.
So where can it fit?
There's potentially other programs. There's ODOT as a partner, of course, through their project dollars. We'll continue to search for opportunities.
Chris, for the benefit of folks who may be just tuning in on this topic right now, can you review some of those big projects from the 2019 TSAP that are now completed or on their way?
Yeah. So, any roundabout work that we've done, is at a safety location. The one that's under construction right now at Hamehook and Deschutes Market Road. One that's under design right now is at Butler Market Road and Powell Butte Highway. We've got 43rd and Lower Bridge that's also under design. And then a couple other projects where we're going to do just internal fixes to traffic control, Butler Market and Hamby. Those kind of wonky intersections out as you're taking Butler Market out to the airport. We've identified solutions there that we'll implement on an interim basis.
Yeah. It's neat to review all the good projects that have come out of the 2019 planning effort.
Yeah, you bet. Yep.
So was the 2019 TSAP the first time we had done that, or is that?
It was the first time.
Yeah, okay, so that was the first. So then by applying for these dollars now, will this be a consultant that would do this for us?
Correct. Yeah, it's $180,000 ask. Yeah.
And then it'll be about a 5-year window since we published 2019 one when this would get published,
Correct.
which is really good time frame.
Yeah, it'll of course, we have the transportation system plan that's under review right now by the Planning Commission. The board will get that. That has a lot of the prior TSAP influence in it. We'll update the TSAP and that will certainly, potentially add to future projects as well.
Yeah, or at least put a good priority to the projects that are most effective for safety.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Is there a motion or just acknowledging that the application will happen if we approve it?
Move to authorize the road department to submit a safe streets for all grant application for our new transportation safety action plan.
I'll second it. And I noticed it's due like next Monday.
We'll be submitting by the end of the week.
Okay, great.
Today's already Wednesday.
It is.
Oh,
Yeah, so don't
is
forget. Yeah, it's
right.
already Wednesday. It's not Monday. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Adair,
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Thank you very much for that. Good discussion. Item number 13, this is our agreement with Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council to distribute state transportation improvement funds.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Andrea Bro with COIC is going to come up and ride shotgun here. The Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund or STIF program was established in House Bill 2017 to provide a dedicated source of public funding for public transportation. Every 2 years, public transportation funding is made available to support access to jobs, improve mobility, relieve congestion, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. Per state statute, Deschutes County is the qualified entity to receive and distribute STIF funding, as the county lacks a transit district. Deschutes County contracts with COIC to administer the county's STIF requirements. And this will be our third contract with COIC under this program. So what you have before you is agreement 2023-654. This encapsulates the 2023 to 2025 STIF funding cycle, which delivers upon the 2023 to 2025 STIF plan and associated programs and projects, which total a little over $22 million. And the board did approve the STIF plan in December of this last year. So with that, Andrea, anything to add or?
Sure. I was just going to spend a few minutes kind of highlighting what some of those STIF dollars did in the previous biennium and what we hope to do in the next one. So one important note is that the STF and STIF funding sources have now combined as of July 1. That helps reduce administrative processes, both at the QE side and ODOT. So it's two funding sources now merged into one. But a few things that we were able to do in the 21-23 biennium cycle. We were able to expand the City of Sisters dial-a-ride boundary. As that city expands, it's important that we serve these ongoing developments. So we've now expanded it twice, making sure that we can get down roads that are paved and plowed for snow. And the City of Sisters has been pretty thrilled about that. We also still continue to transport people from Sisters to a lot of the shopping centers here in Bend. For a lot of our elderly and disabled community. So that was something that was done in 21-23. We also launched the first ever Bend to Mount Bachelor summer service as of this June. It is primarily paid for by another grant, but some of the STIF dollars will help augment that service. It's pretty popular to the point where we need to figure out a new mountain biking trailing system and trying to get as many people as we can and reduce the congestion along that highway. Also, STIF has helped pay for a lot of veterans living in Deschutes County needing to get to medical care. Just within the last year, we've provided about 4,500 veteran rides throughout Central Oregon and about 3,800 originate here in Deschutes County. We're going to continue that program. It's now year 4 and running. We also increased frequency on Route 24. That's our most busiest service of all of public transit's core services, and that's Redmond to Bend. We now have 12 to 14 round trips per day, trying to, again, to increase access and reduce congestion along US 97. We went from roughly 1,800 rides per month to about 5,500 rides per month. So we're going to continue to expand this. That way there's just a continued bus going back and forth, roughly 15 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And if I get enough drivers, we'll introduce the weekend. The other thing that's been pretty relevant over the last 2 years is van pools. So where it doesn't make sense for CET to provide public transit because of a particular shift or location, we've expanded the van pool program with commute options. Just to give you an idea, we have 4 vans coming from Lapine to the Nosler facility here in the city of Bend. We also have 2 vans coming from Redmond to Sisters for various smaller companies, 4 vans from Bend going to the Pronghorn Resort, also Brasada. We have also teachers from Bend going to the Sun River School Districts, Three Rivers School. And then we also have we have one at the road department, Chris, Redmond to Bend. And we also have some up in Warm Springs as well. So those are just some of the highlights where we were able to increase access because of STIF. The executive director of COIC, Tammy Bainey, and myself are also under another round of negotiations to increase driver wages so that they can match a livable wage and closer to what school districts are providing those drivers. So that's just some highlights. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that information.
Andrea, did the route from Lapine to Sun River, that didn't get reenacted, did it?
No, we're still doing kind of communication and outreach. We're still struggling to see if we can get ridership there. It was pretty low. And so we're still working with the commerce there in Sun River to see if we can reinstitute it particularly for Shark. That's where the majority of young employees need to work, but we're finding that the demand is actually people living in Bend needing to go to Sun River. So we may kind of work a different strategy there. The other service that continues to do well, but ridership is stabilized, we want to increase it, is Crooked River Ranch into Terrebonne and Redmond. So it kind of fluctuates, but we're looking at those two to get better ridership out of.
And I just had a call the other day from someone from Deschutes River Woods,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really saying they needed something there. And then what about from OSU Cascades? Do we have any kind of a program there?
Yes, so we do have routes that hit the campus here in Bend, and that's actually served primarily from students. What we're trying to work on is reducing transfers, which can be, a pain for anybody taking transit. So that's part of our master plan. I will say with Deschutes River Woods, we are looking, once we can get a second driver on Route 2 that goes along Brookswood, we would have the second bus dip in to the DRW and back up again. So
You
that's
just need one more driver?
for Route 2. Yep.
Okay, what kind of license do they have to have in order to drive Route 2?
That one's going to be a CDL.
A
Yep.
CDL license,
Mhm.
okay. And what about getting the CDL program? I heard, wasn't somebody retiring like the end of the summer or something?
Yes.
Has that issue been resolved?
Yes. So just for everybody to know, we do in-house training and behind the wheel training and book training for CDL. What we're trying to do is become a third-party CDL tester. And so I'm working with ODOT to see if they'd open the lottery to allow COIC to become a certified tester. So right now we're looking to see if we have the insurance requirements to become a tester ourselves. So we'll be making that decision pretty soon, but we're hoping to become one because there's very few testers out there.
Yes, and that person, how can they retire, right?
Yep. So we've sent people to Eugene to get certified when Ken is not available. Yep.
Okay.
So I think that route for Lapine, the scenario is you got to go a couple miles to get to the bus, and then just a few more miles distance wise would have been getting to Sun River. So you almost have to drive to get to the bus, and
Yeah.
it just falls apart just the way the community's laid out.
And we're hoping to build up a Wiki Up Junction because we find park and rides tend to be easier to gravitate people towards transit because then you can have a parent drop off and on or someone to help you that kind of first last mile piece.
Up Day Road.
Yep.
I mean, if you could justify that somehow, there may be magic right there.
Yeah.
Instead of going up and down 97, up Day Road in Huntington.
Yes. I think the previous route did go up Huntington. But
But Day Road's the other,
Yeah.
there's a lot of houses and kids could walk to Day Road.
definitely.
So
It's an area we need to expand more
Yeah.
on. So
I have a hunch we'll be talking about some of this at COIC at some point, because that's the other board that this gets discussed. Okay, so this is the approval basically for the bulk of funds going through a qualified entity, which is the county, to our transit provider, COIC. and Cascades East Transit.
So according to the documents, it sounds like we still have a carryover of almost $5 million that you guys did not spend in the last 2 years, correct?
Correct.
$5 million.
Yes.
Or is that any more buses that we're still waiting on their arrival?
Yep. Roughly 6 will hopefully come this fall, that were ordered in 2020.
Gee, was I part of that decision or what?
Yes, you were.
I know, I was like,
That was
okay,
fun.
well, it was fun, but we're still waiting on him.
Hmm.
2020.
Yes, Ford has been having a lot of issues.
But did you hear the announcement today by Toyota? They actually say they have an electric battery that will have a capacity of up to 700 miles, which they will, it's supposed to be, much lighter, much better. They'll start making them maybe 25.
Excellent.
Yeah, I know. I was like, well, they're just waiting to, develop the technology. But okay, so we're still waiting on Ford. Okay, Ford, please get it together.
And then you just need the drivers to fill the buses.
Yes. And so obviously with an increase in health insurance and an increase in wages, that's going to put a dent in the STIF funding.
Okay, is there a motion?
I move approval of document number 2023-564, an agreement with Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council for the distribution of STIF formula funds through June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, just acknowledging 654. I think it said 564, but
Oh, you know what? And there is I think there is a transposition in here on one of the numbers. It looks like it's pretty immaterial, but I think it's
My bad on that.
what?
I said, my mistake on that. I was,
3962-574
looking at that.
instead of 547. So of course I made another one on top of it.
okay. Well, I think we got it well documented now. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Thank you very much. Good
Thank you.
discussion.
So if we can, the Deschutes River Woods, I think that would be great.
Boy,
There
there is a demand there. Absolutely. We're waiting for the Murphy interchange to help us out too.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we're blowing right through our agenda. It's just finance. If you can let maybe Dan know, or because we're going to be good 45 minutes ahead, I think, for those guys. Good. Okay. So next item 14, Community Development Department, elimination of unfilled full-time equivalent of 6. Mason up here. Thank you very much. So these are unfilled positions.
That is correct. So good afternoon, Sherry Pinner with Community Development.
Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director.
So we are here before you today to ask for a reduction of FTE to the tune of 6 unfilled FTE, which would bring us to a total of 58. You will recall in January, we removed 8 FTE. At that time, we had about 14 positions that were vacant, and the recruitments really weren't resulting in any applications. We also have had permitting volume decreases. So during January, we thought it would be okay to reduce by 8 FTE. Based on our current permitting volumes, I believe we could reduce by an additional 6. That will leave the department with 2 unfilled FTE to navigate any sort of permitting increases or volume changes that would require additional FTE. And I do believe that that is enough to get us through for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So any questions?
Well, one of my questions is, we saw a period of extremely high permit application activity. We come down. Do we feel like it's leveling out at a lower level, or do we feel like it's still in decline?
What we've seen this fiscal year is that the declines have not decreased more. So we really have been bumping around, like on land use applications, somewhere between a decrease of 18% and 20%. Single family dwelling permits issued is somewhere around 43 to 45%. So they've bounced around those numbers, but we haven't seen significant decreases and increases per month. What I can tell you is that what we also experienced in fiscal year 23 were a lot of non-residential projects. an extremely high number of them, which really generated a good amount of revenue for us in ways other than single-family dwelling permits. So in the past, we've had a lot of single-family dwelling permits. Now we have a kind of a combination of non-residential projects. So we've had Sun River they picked up their permits on Friday, a really large project. We've had some apartment complexes in Lapine and Sisters. We've had U.S. Forest Service has done some remodeling. So really that it's not necessarily a new line of revenue, but it's been a lot more activity this fiscal year than previous. Yeah, and then, what we're seeing on single family dwelling permit or applications submitted is not a huge number.
So why now? We just had this discussion, kind of looking at the big picture for the annual budget. So then when I saw this agenda, I'm like, oh, what, this is another moment in time. So is this just with the reality of where we're at getting into this next fiscal year, or different than we thought a couple of months ago?
So I can speak from a financial side. During the budget process, we were under the impression that unfilled FTE would have a health benefits charge to it.
Yep.
And of course, we queued this up, made this decision, and then, that is no longer the case. I do still feel like 58 FTE is a good number to get us through current permitting volume.
So, yeah, as I say, I mean, during the budget process, I acknowledged that, okay, this is a structural change underlying the departments, and now it's propagating through some of the choices about how we staff or open positions. Understood. Okay.
And thankfully, the board has been very supportive of CDD when we've had trends in the past that have shown growth and, to an extent that we needed to be responsive and bring on staff. So in the past, we have gone to the board for budget amendments or requests to add new FTEs. This is being done, as Sherry noted, just to be fiscally prudent. It reflects the volume that we're aware of today. And I'm thankful that, what Sherry's seeing is not a precipitous drop, but it's likely maybe a new normal where we're plateauing after the pandemic, all those resources that were made available, the remote workers. And this is, 58 FTE seems right to me. And I'm grateful that based on where it looks like we're ending the fiscal year, that we're going to be stable going forward. And you'll recall that we have several new staff at all levels of the division. And so if we can be confident that their training will continue and they'll begin representing institutional knowledge and that we can rely upon it going forward, that's what I want the most. So we'll track this and we can certainly keep the board abreast of it, on a quarterly basis. But this feels like the right thing to do. And it was done, as Sherry noted, initially it looked like the overhead was going to be something that we were going to have to absorb per FTE, and that's since changed. But we want to be nimble and responsive to our budget and ultimately our contingency funds.
Well, and it's okay to be nimble and responsive. And, if the department fluctuates, let's do it. I mean, that's part of the free market economy. When people are building or not building, we need to be dialing ourselves in also.
So I get nervous, the building safety inspector 3, we can really get by without someone coming in with that kind of a knowledge.
So that position in particular is interesting to me because that position was created in August of 2021 specifically for plan review. We've recruited for it since and have had little to no response.
Okay. And then what about the code compliance? That they're handling that okay without trying to fill that position?
They are adjusting to that reality. And we will monitor that workload. It's invariably code compliance, whether we have 4 FTE or 5, the work volume exceeds the capacity of our staff. That's just the reality of how CDD has structured that responsibility. We are prioritizing code compliance cases, of course, with the board support and coordination with solid waste. We're going to be building an abatement program. So we'll track that and we will monitor it. And I expect a conversation, over the course of this now new fiscal year to keep the board abreast of how abatement is working, what we've done, where we've seen some success. And if we find that, the demands have accelerated to such an extent, through the next year's budgetary process, we could, there's a scenario where we could respectfully request another code compliance specialist. But right now, we need to be fiscally responsible. And I'm grateful for all of our staff for acknowledging that this fiscal reality is something that for the time being is going to limit our ability to bring on new staff.
I was listening to some business people discussing the situation this morning, and they were saying no one that has a mortgage of like 3% is going to want to sell at this point in time. So it's really an unusual cross section in America, because who wants to get a mortgage with 7%? So those people aren't selling, and yeah, and then of course, who's building? Yeah. Well, and then of course we have people with cash. So it's incredibly complicated.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts?
I continue to find it problematic that activity like code compliance is funded by current applications and fees. I think it's very rare when the issue of concern in a code compliance case is something that is happening because of a very recent application. In many cases, we're dealing with problems that, a property hasn't submitted an application for in 20, 30, something like that years. So if we're understaffed at code compliance, which I believe we are, it to me suggests that we should be trying to fund code compliance in a different way. That's just for big picture discussion. That's not necessarily about this specific this specific action today.
All right. So yeah, is there support for the
Well, I
resolution?
so appreciate your analysis, and when you came through last January, when you said we could eliminate 8 positions, I know you realize we need our building department to be as responsive to the community as possible, and you still feel that you can be with this elimination, these unfilled positions. So, and you can always come back to us as quickly as you need if something changes and some really big projects come in or something. We've got to really have a great service here. I think that really helps the building process. I know I always normally hear a lot of good things about the county. So anyway, I move approval of resolution number 2023-041 to eliminate 6 unfilled full-time equivalent positions in the Community Development Department.
And transfer the program appropriations to contingency, or is that a
Oh,
separate-
do we put it together? Put it together?
Yes.
Okay, so, and transfer program appropriations to contingency, the 607,000, I believe,
Second.
$363.
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Good discussion. As I say, there's a point of pride about our responsiveness to the building community. So let's make sure that's always there. I think we all agree with that. So is there any other discussion? So seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 15, Planning Division Work Plan Update and Long Range Planning.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. Your Planning Manager, Will Groves, here to talk to you a little bit about our work plan. I, of course, come before you regularly to discuss where we are, where we're going, get some feedback on which way we should head, and that's what we're here for today. Following the withdrawal of the Mule Deer Wildlife Inventory Project, we do have some capacity again, and we're here to solicit and to get any comments or revisions to that work plan. At the outset, I wanted to talk about the conclusion of the Mule Deer process. Of course, on the 26th, the board discussed convening a Mule Deer Steering Committee as recommended by the Planning Commission. And we wanted to see what the level of interest was in that. We had some initial perspectives on that issue. First is that if we were to go in that direction, we would need some feedback from the board on what the goals were, what the timeline, who you'd hope to participate in such a process. We also wanted to note that there's some risk at this time of potential confusion generated by introducing a county process while ODF&W is concurrently updating its mule deer management plan and taking public feedback. That update may be a better process to work through some of the issues we were struggling with, because it goes beyond the habitat fragmentation we were dealing with in land use and has specific modules dealing with predation, disease, poaching, automobile collisions, and wildlife crossings. And CDD doesn't have regulatory authority over those issues. In coordination with ODF&W, they've also indicated that this is their preferred method to continue to engage on these issues. If the board did want us to engage on this, given that there's been very strong divergent opinions and our lack of expertise in this level of biology, we would likely recommend professional mediation or a facilitator for that, and we don't have dollars allocated for that currently. All of this to say that if this is something that the board would want to go forward with, we're willing and able and could come forward with a work plan, just some headwinds to acknowledge and some direction that we would need to go that way. I'll pause here to see. I want to note that there's a couple big items below as well, things that are in the time that I've worked in community development of unusual urgency, but we can go to those as a second matter. Did you want to take a moment to discuss this steering committee, or would you like to hear about what the other items on the menu today were?
Oh, I'd like to discuss the steering committee.
Please.
I have talked to so many people that feel that we really need a steering committee. We've got lots of people in the community that have been feeding the deer, that have a stake in the game. And I've actually, as someone who's been trying to remove a lot of juniper in Deschutes County, I learned something the other day that the juniper actually removes the bitter brush, and that is a major source of nourishment for the deer. So therefore, it's, to me, it's like it's an unintended consequence where we're removing juniper. We're actually giving the opportunity for the bitter brush to come back and support. We really need our baby. We need our fawns to survive. And I feel like Tanya's been working on this for a long time. I would feel that she could be a facilitator, but I've had lots of people in the community that said, gee, I would really appreciate being part of this group. I want to know what's really going on too. I know we've got cars, we've got poaching, we've got cougars, we have coyotes, we've got wolves. We have all these things that are going on. And I feel like I would like to actually hear from people that live out in the community. And I thought some of the things I learned, especially in relation to like what's happened in Deschutes County with the number of juniper that have overtaken our county, I thought that was interesting and very impactful if you look. So, and I know out where we are, we have a lot of elk now, and sometimes the deer and the elk don't really get along together, but from the group that have said, gee, I would like to be part of this stakeholder group, I feel that it's very important.
Will, can I ask this ODFW mule deer plan that they are working on? Does it address, you mentioned some of the other things that it addresses, does it address habitat fragmentation and loss of habitat?
Yes, it does. Here, I'm going to bring up that website here so that I can read the complete information. You can go ahead and proceed.
I mean, in a reasonably location specific detailed way, or in a very broad state level way?
I haven't dug in other than kind of just seeing that that is one of the items that they're working on for the plan. I don't know what the level of granularity that they're engaging with.
If I may, Peter Gachowski, Community Development Director, we have coordinated with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. They are updating a 20-year wild mule deer management plan for the management unit. And it's addressing, as I understand it, all of the threats that are facing mule deer. So just as Commissioner Adair noted, predation, disease, automobile collisions, habitat fragmentation, etc. ODF&W does not have capacity to the extent that the board felt like a steering committee was appropriate to convene. ODF&W is running this process, and we can provide you links to the website, but according to their website, they're taking public input on all of these issues through online virtual participation. They hope to finalize the plan in February. And so, some comments or some thoughts for the board to consider in no certain order is, in light of the various threats that are facing mule deer beyond habitat fragmentation, disease, automobile collisions, wildlife crossings, that's not the domain of, I'm obligated as the department to just acknowledge that we don't have the expertise to weigh in and provide any kind of judgment or interpretation, right? It's not in our domain. And so I think a question, and this would be one that we could come back to in coordination with administration, is what does it mean to convene a steering committee? What is the intent and purpose? Who is the recipient of this information? And what we experienced with the mule deer inventory during several open houses and 2 public hearings is the opinions that are being offered and the science that is being referred to is divergent, and opinions, as the board's well aware, can be emotional. And so that's why we acknowledged the facilitation piece. Could Tanya facilitate? Of course she could. Could Will or I facilitate? Of course. And yet the board doesn't need to determine this now. But if you find that this is a priority, I would respectfully ask that the organization and CDD can certainly begin the preparation of what does this look like? What does this work program entail? Who's the intended audience? And what is the outcome that the board wants to find with it? So there's a lot to unpack there. And I just acknowledge, of course, if the board wants CDD to initiate this effort, we of course would do so. But on the face of it, it seems very similar to a cannabis advisory panel or a wolf advisory committee, where the topics are transcending issues or areas of expertise that go beyond CDD.
Well, and the other contrast is that those other processes were essentially legislatively directed for us. If we wanted to receive cannabis revenue, we'd had to have this panel. If we wanted to have access to federal and state funding for wolf depredation compensation, we had to form that committee. This, I think this steering committee concept is pretty it's pretty fuzzy and vague in terms of its purpose. In my opinion, the county should be using its staff and other resources to determine what the county should be doing about certain issues or topics. Many of the things that people have said that they want this stakeholder group to discuss are outside the scope of county responsibilities, not just CDD's responsibilities, but outside the scope of just about any county department that I can think of. So while I personally find the issue of vehicle collisions, wildlife crossings on major highways extremely important, and have been doing everything I can to advocate at the state level for funds to support those kinds of projects, I don't see that as the responsibility of any specific county department. I chat about it a little bit with our road department, but it's not their job to create wildlife crossings across Highway 20 or Highway 97. So without tangible things that we can point to that would come out of this stakeholder committee that are the county's job, I don't think it's an appropriate use of county staff or other resources to stand this committee up. I've definitely had conversations with other wildlife advocates, mule deer advocates in the community who have pointed to a couple of very, very specific interfaces, nexus points between the county's work and these other factors that affect mule deer besides habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. I've heard about the DA's ability to prosecute more severely poaching crimes. I've heard concerns about vehicle collisions with mule deer on a certain section of Klein Falls Highway. Those are two interfaces with the issues of vehicle collisions and poaching that we have specific jurisdiction over. We don't need a stakeholder committee to tell us that. If we really care about these specific kinds of issues, we could work on those issues right now. So I don't really see a lot of focus and value to this desire to set up a stakeholder committee.
Well, I really do. I feel like Deschutes again can be the forefront of really why are we losing our mule deer? Going back to the roads. Okay. 100 deer a year are killed in Bend. This is all the research I did. 400 on Deschutes County roads. That's the number of bodies that we pick up. And then 600 through the state, though there is a rule now in the state where if you find a deer, you can actually pick it up. If I think you have to report it or something, but you can pick up the body if you think there's some usable meat on the deer. But that's only 1,100. And if we have 300 cougars in this county and a cougar kills at least one deer a week in order to eat, that extrapolates out to an enormous number. So I feel like there's all these different things that are happening, and then finding out about, how all of our juniper have taken over our bitterbrush. I think that we really want to be able to feed. The only fawn I have seen this year was in Sisters, next to Sisters Coffee. So does that tell you that there is a whole herd of deer that are happily living in Sisters, and they know when it's hunting season because that's when you really see them in town? But I feel like I feel with the people that I've talked to that are very respectful, we love our deer, love my deer. I want to keep them healthy. I want to keep them going, and to know we can actually come up with a group, and then we can pass that information on to ODF and W. But I feel like we should do that. People are really, they're wondering, why is it we do have such a loss? And then apparently ODF and W can actually feed the deer when we have a terrible winter like we had a couple of years ago. Remember, we had back-to-back really bad winters, a lot of snow on the ground. Those deer undoubtedly need to be fed. And apparently the state does have somewhat of a program that can feed the deer. So, it seems like we all need to know what is the real story. And I believe that just bringing everybody together with a stakeholder group, I realize that, we've got both sides of a story, but I feel it could be a real learning experience, and ODF and W might appreciate the knowledge.
If developing a comprehensive understanding of the problem and getting the appropriate entities to deal with their responsibilities is, in my opinion, best accomplished by engaging with this state level planning effort that ODF and W is conducting. It is a planning effort to address all of the factors that people have been talking to us about, which are out of the scope of our responsibilities.
So I've concluded if in other discussions that I want our professionals, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, to be the domain expert on this, which is what they are. And I know that they're the ones that came to us and said, hey, we have some new maps. And that's what started this all, because I was here for that whole thing too. So I have a little vision here is another agenda item for our board to bring in ODF and W, acknowledge what we've done, where we're at, maybe somebody that is really of a domain expert can explain how much the, fragmentation of land is part of this percentage wise, and how these other aspects of it fit into the big picture. And as I say, a decision was made to stop this one process, but we all want happy, healthy wildlife. So my vision is, as I say, is to have another board meeting, inviting ODF and W in here to conclude this process at Deschutes County, but really empower our state agency to, have the community's full input, because we could launch our community into that discussion. As I say, if it all comes back and they decide to say, well, this is the most important thing you can do is stop the fragmentation, the bulletin had it right, vote for different commissioners. I'm comfortable in the position I've taken on this because of private property rights and because of 79% publicly owned lands in Deschutes County. So I just don't see the action being existing private property. So yeah, as I say, it was interesting seeing an editorial that way.
I think that ODF and W has delivered that message to us and delivered the data to us for us to understand how important the habitat fragmentation and habitat loss issues are. And it's
79%
clear
publicly owned. It's just not something I'm going to support.
When you've got
It's not
300 cougars running around,
the winter range is different than the winter range is different than the entirety of the county.
lovely.
So
As a
good topic.
as a transition, I think it'll be helpful to, if, again, and we can do it succinctly, just to acknowledge some of these responsibilities that were directed to us out of the 2023 to 2023 legislative session, specifically House Bill 3197. The other piece that, as I transition to Will, is, and it's noted in a footnote in the memorandum, and so I'm just highlighting that footnote, is long range planning is down in FTE. You're well aware that a senior transportation planner retired. Thankfully we had an internal recruitment that demonstrated that they are quite capable and will fill that vacancy extremely well. We're not filling that long range planning position for reasons that we talked about the last agenda item. So Will's team, and Will can talk about it, we want to make sure that we're as efficient and also as accountable to the board on some very important projects that, as Will talk about, that relate to housing and economic development. So just wanted to underscore the bandwidth that we have, and there's a lot of projects that are headed to the board this late summer, fall, and into the winter that are going to come out of the planning division. So just want to keep that on your radar.
Yeah, to pivot away from discussions of why we're abandoning the mule deer overlay update for unidentified private property reasons. I would like to say that
It's self-explanatory.
when we had our discussion a week or two ago, you couldn't give me a specific example of the private property rights that were going to be impacted by the passage of that. So I don't think it's so self-explanatory. Anyway, I would like to say that on this list, the doing the work to be able to implement Senate Bill 1013 strikes me as an extremely important piece for community development to be working on this opportunity to essentially create a tremendous number of housing opportunities for people who have an RV and have someone willing to host them in the rural parts of the county. I could see resulting in hundreds, maybe many hundreds of essentially housing units that we currently don't have. In the same way that rural ADUs could be a game changer for us. So within this list, that would be my priority in terms of what work we're going to be taking on with the new capacity that we have available.
Well, I highlighted that also, knowing that if we're going to talk about accessory dwelling units, this may be just a great parallel path. And as I say, it's not optimal. It's not the best solution, especially for year-round dwelling. But if there's rules and opportunities out there, we should take it up as much as possible. So, as I say, I mean, it's easy to figure out. Well, maybe not. We'll see if do you agree with that? If we're selecting,
You mean
priority? Yeah.
Senate Bill 1013?
Yeah.
Yes.
As a priority of multiple items that could be selected.
Yes.
Commissioners, House Bill 3197 is significant in scope and responsibility. And Will can talk about some of the details there. Regarding Senate Bill 1013, just some strategic thoughts that we've had internally. It would, later this month, the board's going to hold a hearing on rural ADUs and be in a position to adopt rural ADUs sometime this summer or early fall, depending on the testimony in the public process. There's a lot of internal coordination that will be talked about as we prep you for that hearing to ensure that property owners and investors are understand the responsibilities and the siting criteria for rural ADUs. Senate Bill 1013, as the chair noted, and Commissioner Chang runs, it's very similar in terms of kind of siting requirements. And we've thought about it following on the heels of rural ADU. I don't want to get ahead of the board. The board
Good idea.
runs the rural ADU process and finds that it's worthy of adoption. Senate Bill 1013 can really follow the coattails there. So in terms of structure and timing, there's some real synergy at that point. But as I've now mentioning it 3 times, House Bill 3197 is something that really shouldn't be overlooked or dismissed, given the requirements that are being placed on Will's team as it pertains to clear and objective standards for housing in 3 specific sub areas of our county.
Who is going to be pushing us, harassing us, suing us as a result of House Bill 3197? How will that pressure to have clear and objective standards come to bear in our specific land use processes at the county level?
That's a great question. And, as we discussed in the work session previously, this was initially something that was unveiled in cities. And so we can look at the case law pattern in there. And what you see happening is you see both developers who are unhappy with the outcome of discretionary processes point to this statute and say that rule does not apply to me. For example, for subdivisions, as a possibility, we have a rule that says that the subdivision needs to be orderly. And boards have approved or denied applications for subdivisions based on the layout because they're orderly, but that's neither clear nor objective. So you could see a scenario where a developer could come in with a plan that maybe a board didn't want to see developed, and that they wouldn't have, and the board wouldn't have control over it. Conversely, the upside of that is, to the extent that these were board welcome projects, which overwhelmingly they are, and there was some controversy associated with this, the developer could say, look, to the extent that I'm being appealed, or opponents are telling me I shouldn't develop based on this rule is scratched off anyhow because of this statutory provision. We've seen the opposite in the courts as well, where a board has made a decision to approve something where opponents have said that was a discretionary decision that you made. It can't be used as a basis for a decision. And that decision is voided on that purpose, for that purpose. So I think Senate Bill 1013 is really exciting. I'm glad that you all saw that, because that's a remarkable opportunity to hopefully bring a lot of people in from the cold, you know, who are living. I think there's, at least in my experience of talking to people in the community, there are at least some number of them who could, you know, would like hookups and would like a place to go in their RV parks. House Bill 3197 is a train that's coming at us down the tracks. And on July 1st, 2025, our code is Swiss cheese. There are holes all in it, and we're expected, I think, by the legislature to patch it during that time frame. Some of it's relatively straightforward. You know, there's definitions that we can deal with, but something as basic as we have single family dwellings in the county. We don't, in a clear and objective way, tell you what a single family dwelling is. We said it was, you know, some group of people living together with a kitchen. And that's been persistently confusing for planners and the community. So very basic things like definitions, but other things, getting ready for them. And I think I'm going to switch to a kind of a less of a fear tone and a positive tone here, is that the purpose of this legislation, and I want to be very positive about it, the purpose of this is to facilitate housing development. And as it stands right now, when you have a rule that isn't clear, it isn't objective, a developer can't create investment-backed expectations for development against a code that they don't know how it's going to operate. They have to make an application, they enter into a process, they find out if they're going to have lawyered opposition, if they're going to the state courts. And the notion here is that if we both have to, and if we do create these clear and objective opportunities, we've streamlined housing in a really exciting way for future development so that people can know what the outcome is. And that's good for both the development community, but also for the surrounding neighbors, because there's set expectations about what a development needs to do and not need to do. And there's not so much harmonious or compatible that ends up in the courts.
Another piece regarding enforcement, which Washington County has experienced, is and they're the county that basically advocated for House Bill 3197, which targeted specific areas instead of all the entirety of rural counties to be subject to clear and objective standards. It's been now limited to rural residential exception areas, unincorporated communities, and non-resource lands. Washington County has been mired in litigation since 2017. They have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on trying to implement clear and objective standards, specifically, I think, within their urban growth boundaries. And they have a number of rural areas that are residential. They have robust Goal 5 inventories. The time it's taken them to meet this obligation has been extensive, and individuals and organizations have challenged the timeline for them to meet that obligation. It's so much so that they requested an Land Conservation and Development Commission authorized an enforcement order. Now, Washington County felt very confident that there's been a couple of remands from the Land Use Board of Appeals, but they felt like even with the Land Conservation and Development Enforcement Order, which I think is approximately a two-year window, that they could meet that. But to the question at hand, if the county didn't prioritize this, you could have entities across the spectrum that are expecting Deschutes County to fulfill its statutory obligations and could seek an enforcement order. And
Across what spectrum?
that in this case, that you could have advocacy, conservation organizations that want clear and objective standards that better address Goal 5. You could have housing advocates that say, Deschutes County, you need clear and objective standards in these three locations. You haven't done it. We're therefore going to go to the state to issue an enforcement order. And that comes with the risk that the state could penalize the county, could presumably threaten our independence of evaluating quasi-judicial land use issues in the manner that we are. So Washington County is a data point that has raised the attention of all of Oregon counties that are now subject to House Bill 3197. So It's a 2-year window, but as Will noted, and it's described generally in the memorandum, it will take us, this is a multi-phased, multi-year process that will have implications on Goal 5. We have to have clear and objective standards in our existing Goal 5 inventories. We need to have clear and objective standards in our landscape management combining zones as it pertains to lands that are rural residential exception areas. It impacts the floodplain zone potentially in our unincorporated communities of Tumalo and Sun River. So there's a lot of work that's going to have to go into this. Now, the board may find that in the short session, it makes sense to engage AOC and our legislative delegation to respectfully request that clear and objective standards be narrowed to those areas that don't apply to acknowledge Goal 5, wildlife, Goal 7, floodplain hazards. But in the meeting that I attended on Friday with the Association of County Planning Directors, and there were AOC representatives there, the reading of the tea leaves that I'm getting is the building industry is not going to be supportive of any dilution of House Bill 3197, and they will fight it. So that's the predicament that we find ourselves in. And the board's been debriefed on House Bill 3197 over the course of a legislative session. So this isn't new. It's just, I think it's a respectful acknowledgement that considering allocating some staff time to this topic over the course of the next 2 years is going to be an investment worth considering for reasons that Will articulated.
Wanting to have clear and objective standards within urban growth boundaries so that you can produce the housing that communities need is really different than wanting to have clear and objective standards in the rural unincorporated part of Deschutes County. The choice we're having to make right here between, focusing staff time on dealing with Senate Bill 1013 or 3197 demonstrates it perfectly. I mean, with Senate Bill 1013, with rural ADUs, we are talking about opportunities to create housing in the rural unincorporated county that our community desperately needs. My impression is that HB 3197 in Deschutes County is going to be pushed by people who really want to build very large, expensive homes on very large properties. And frankly, I don't think that that's our highest priority right now. So that's kind of my rationale for saying I don't really believe that this is the most strategic place for us to be putting our energy. I know that might be inviting all sorts of policy or legal battles in the future, but as those projects come up on a case by case basis, I actually think it's helpful and valuable for the community to understand on a case by case basis what we're fighting about. What kind of housing is being produced and how much staff time, how much county resources, how much sacrifice of county discretion to be able to protect groundwater quality or wildlife habitat or farmland or other things. How much is that housing that is being proposed worth? I would much rather us fight that on a case by case basis so that our community can understand what is at stake and what the choices are, than fight it in this abstract way that it's being played out right here.
So when I look at 3197, I see it's a big one. But I kind of come to the same conclusion. Let's put a package together, ADUs and recreation vehicles. Let's have the full force review on this as a package together. Deschutes County is always in the forefront and bleeding edge on a lot of these land use things. Let's just let 3197 sit out there for another 6 months. It's kind of the way I start to see it. And what I do see, and I don't know, I mean, it's kind of a chess game, you getting into the concept of what might happen there, but how complicated could this be? Even just trying to do that package. You say, oh, well, this is what we think clear and objective. No, I don't. We're going to appeal that. No, we can never get it landed. So that's what I worry about, is it just, it could be a project, no matter how much time you put in it, it could just keep consuming resources.
Mr. Chairman, if I just one quick question. As AOC.
What is LCDC's point of view on this?
Well, good question. This is going to be a matter of figuring out how to implement the law and by the timeline. My question was going to be, do you have a sense with other counties? Everybody must be thinking, let's think about Lane County or Marion County or Jackson County, counties that are similar to us in many ways. They must be starting this process as well. So there might be lessons learned in how to do this with, what would Lane County's setbacks be, for example, from a wetland or a floodplain, or as you mentioned, there's a lot of these. So to begin to see, it is challenging because it's the trade-off of predictability for whomever is going to build versus a one size fits all. Because if it's 80 feet or for a setback or 120 feet for a setback or whatever the case may be, some groups may love the 80, the other is going to be 120, and that's feet setback from one of these resources. And neither one of them may be right, because it's the resource isn't applicable to us. So there's a real balancing act. Anyway, just go back to my question is, do you have a sense of what other counties are doing and how they're beginning to approach it, and how you as a part of that group can learn from each other, and how some of those in 6 months, if that's what the board's direction is, might benefit us. Of course, we have a narrower window of 18 months maybe to develop and adopt those than we do with 2 years, but maybe we also really learn from others. And I'm curious if you have any perspectives about that.
My impressions from Friday's conversation is that Deschutes County is one of the few counties that's really understands the magnitude of the responsibility that comes with it. Many of our counties in Oregon are so rural that I don't think they have the portfolio of exception lands and unincorporated communities like we do. And so, and they just don't have the staff. So, the handful of counties, you've listed some of them, the metro counties, Lane, Jackson, Deschutes. I think that subgroup is kind of figuring out how to chart a course, and is beginning to have conversations with their internal team as well as their elected officials. So there's more to come, and we'll know more in the next several months. And again, staff respects the board's direction. What we feel is important is to underscore what we're identifying on the horizon that has some significance, and let the county commissioners make an informed decision. And of course, we will execute that decision to the best of our ability. But we'll know more about House Bill 3197, in the next 3 to 6 months. To the extent that the board is interested in exploring a legislative concept for the short session, I think that there could be some support for that. Again, more to come.
Well, this is where, people that are engaged in this concept, and I'm referring to, land advocacy organizations or builder groups, show us what you're thinking here. I don't know who the power players are in this domain. If there's a small section of code that could be, proposed as a, public input to this matter, that may be the value here right now. Take a topic and run it down the way a little bit. And I know that's what you would do, but let's have the external people taking a look at this, possibly at this for a while. And
Yes, if we could take 3 months in order to implement Senate Bill 1013, take those 3 months, and then hopefully it'll be clear and objective at the end of those 3 months that we can hit 3197.
And you're right, the Commissioner Dare's point, just to underscore it, I mean, law today requires, right, so Senate Bill 1013 applies to rural residential exception areas. as it does for rural ADUs. So the law today says whatever standards are adopted by in this case, Deschutes County, they would have to be clear and objective. So we do understand how new code has to be structured. It's the challenge is untying that knot as it pertains to our existing code. So yes, we can.
So it'll be a good practice to create new code that's clear and objective.
That's right. So we can certainly come back if the board seems to be their consensus around Senate Bill 1013, come back and get rural ADUs, get Senate Bill 1013 through the process, and then those outcomes plus other deliverables that are completed will compel Will to check in with the board like he's doing today to make sure that we're allocating our capacity according to the board's directives. So this is very helpful. We appreciate the discourse and your assessment of opportunity costs of picking one project over another.
Well, it's good to think into it a little bit more.
One of my hopes for this Senate Bill 1013 implementation is that this could help us divert people before they end up in the Hunnell Roads or the Dirt Worlds or in other places with their RV. So that may be placing more hope in this than is warranted, but we won't know until this opportunity is really fleshed out and people have access to it in our community. But just kind of so you understand where some of the passion comes from. I really hope that this could be an approach, a diversion approach in relation to homelessness. I mean, in some ways, you could imagine this being essentially, individual property by individual property, safe parking opportunity. So I think there's a lot of potential.
Well, so for the mule deer, if we're not doing a committee per se, little diverse opinions up here. As I say, I had that vision, either a handoff or an agenda item where we're like documenting, what we've done here in the body of knowledge on a website already, but also have an ODNF F&W at the table here saying, oh, we have this process and we're going to be looking at these aspects of it, acknowledging that they are the experts. And then, I think you might have said in passing, it boils down to resources at ODF&W also. Let's lay that on the table. If ODF&W has grand ideas and no resources, let's let the world know, okay, well, if it really matters, maybe some legislative effort or resource allocation or whatever. I don't know what the answer is at this time, but the fact that, there's a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah, we can definitely let them know about your interest in having them come and present, and we'll see what their availability looks like.
I was just going to ask, do we have support from 2 commissioners to invite ODFW to present? And really, if their website's very good. I looked at it a couple of times now. Thank you for the link. And maybe they could provide an overview of what their project and process is. And if they're really that maxed out, then perhaps they could do so virtually. Wherever their team may be located across the state, and they can talk about everything that they have listed.
And that's my thought. Yeah. Explain what the vision is, what the steps are, what the resources are.
If we're having ODF&W come, I would like us to have them dedicate a portion of their presentation to a discussion of the importance of habitat preservation, or addressing habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. And to let them share directly with the Board of Commissioners, their perspectives on the overlay update project. Since we will not have the benefit of hearing that during public hearings.
Well, as I say, I'm not trying to scratch a wound here because there's, I'm comfortable in where I'm at. So, I want to help move this forward and not just draw differences if possible. And I mean, I'm just letting you know,
my fellow commissioners have said that they really want to understand all of the factors affecting mule deer. I don't think we fully understand yet the importance, the foundational importance of habitat, winter range habitat.
And I've heard this,
And the way that it interacts with all of those other issues.
and I would like to have the predators. I mean, it's not a happy world out there. I just heard a cat killed right by my house 2 nights ago. So
And
it's
a
not,
malnourished deer can't run away from a predator as fast as a well.
As I say,
yes.
I want to lay information out. I'm not here to.
And if you're going to talk about habitat, you need to talk about what the junipers have done to the bitter brush in Central Oregon, because that is a major source of nourishment for the deer. So it's just another part of the story that I just want everyone to be aware of.
I actually understand that pretty darn well, having worked in forest restoration for 20 years here.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Nick,
I might just offer what's really valuable, and I would just direct people to the website. And I would hope that they could provide an overview of what their work is. There's 10 points: migration, habitat fragmentation, economics and social values, habitat nutrition, harvest management, disease, predation, monitoring, poaching, and anthropogenic impact. So I think it really captures what we've heard from the commission about all the topics. So hopefully they could at least summarize the nature of their work, kind of where it's at and the release dates and where it may go. So hopefully that would be acceptable to the board to have them share that.
okay, well, we'll see where that goes. As I say, I guess, are you looking for clarity? Is there support for bringing ODF and W or offering them to come in? Because they could decline too, possibly, but there's support for hearing from them.
I thought you had 2 votes already.
Okay,
I'm just saying, I want to hear about the juniper habitat
thank you.
Great, thank you for your time.
in case you missed it.
Got right on schedule with that one. Or no, I guess we're still ahead a little bit.
Oh, no, we're doing
Yeah.
great.
Okay, so as I say, this is going to finish up the day here. Presentation of countywide long-term financial forecast and courthouse debt service. This is all legislative session.
Thank you for turning down the AC.
Was that turning up the heat?
Well, the air conditioning was a little bit chilly, but you've got a coat on, so.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Robert Tintle, Chief Financial Officer.
Dan Emerson, Budget and Financial Planning Manager.
So Dan just handed out to you today the presentation we'll be presenting, so you have a copy of that in front of you. We are here today to talk about the long-term financial forecast. Now that we know the outcome, the expected anticipated funding from the state for the courthouse, and given some recent decisions we've made for funding other programs, we'll talk to you about options for those as well. And so we will start it off with Dan giving a presentation on the long-term financial forecast.
Feel free to ask any questions. We're just getting you the presentation because it was kind of a quick turnaround there in the last couple of weeks since budget decision time. But yeah, so this
is updated presentation. I mean, kind of the same presentation, but new numbers run through the thing.
exactly this
Got it.
$15 million.
Yeah.
plus $15 million, maybe less a few commitments that we made, some of the external commitments, plus some of the budget decisions that were made. So, yep, this is a long-term financial update that we previously saw, just kind of reworked. Today's topics, we'll be going over the funding sources overview, the general fund forecast, the courthouse funding, now that we did receive that $15 million from the state, those available funds and what those are being spent against, potential future financial priorities and commitments for the county, courthouse buy down options, considerations and recommendations and motions. We've kind of already been over this, but the purpose statement is to reconvene now that we've had the budget committee week and do have $15 million in new resources, state funding, and to look at the courthouse expansion and different options for buying down the courthouse.
Yeah, and I do have to ask you, a year or two ago, we sold a piece of property on the east side for $1 million, and we had said we wanted that funding for the courthouse. I don't know if we officially have ever voted on that. Whatever happened to that funding?
I'll have to look into that. Was that from property management, Christy Bollinger?
Right.
Okay.
It was $1 million sale.
Owner's property.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll reach out to Christy and find out where those dollars are, where they're at.
Okay.
So here's the current available funding sources for debt and maintenance. So all those available funds go to the general reserve, which you see on the right-hand side here. The purpose of the general reserve is to consolidate all the available funds and use those funds to buy down debt service on the courthouse, which is originally estimated $65 million total, and future uses for capital maintenance, minimal space additions, and operational expenses. And so during budget week, at the conclusion of this budget, we have prior and current years general fund in the general reserve of around $6 million. We have TRT of about $5.4 million, LATCF funding, which is that local assistance, tribal consistency fund, ARPA, of $4.6 million. We do have some return funds from ARPA of $400,000. That was a budget decision. Half of the PILT allocation, which we project to be around $400,000, is also in the general reserve. And of course, the $15 million state funding. After the minimum $15 million debt buy down and a $500,000 fiscal year 24 commitment to the housing trust fund, which I think was made last week, the general reserve balance is approximately $16,306,000 or $306,019 after all of those available resources. But as you'll see as we go through this, the vast majority of that balance of 16 million will be needed and is projected to be needed for the annual debt service payment for 20 years, plus kind of our minimal capital needs. Any questions on this one?
Okay, your schedule, you gave it to us on 5/9 for ARPA funds expected to return was 465,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you have in here is 400,000.
In the budget, we have 400,000. I do believe that we'll probably have close to about 465,000. And as we get to the kind of the list here, we can talk about exactly what that ARPA balance is, what we have in return funds, and what we can still allocate.
Okay.
So just a brief kind of general effects of the state funding on the forecast as we go into here. In the previous forecast, which was done last just this last May, when we didn't have the 15 million, we were unable to cover our long-term debt in fiscal year 38. If we did a $10 million buy down without this 15 million, we were unable to cover it in fiscal year 42. With the new funding from the state and a buy down, we are projected to be able to cover the entire cost of the courthouse expansion, which is something that we're all really excited about, obviously. And thank you for everyone for all your hard work advocating for those dollars. However, if you recall from our last forecast, we also have an operational issue in the general fund. And the state funding had no effect on the general fund operations forecast. And the reason for that is the state funding is recorded outside of the general fund and the general reserve specifically for the courthouse. And the general fund is comprised of departments and operational transfers. Courthouse funding cannot offset those expenditures or slow the projected operational growth of those departments. State funding, however, did increase the amount of unallocated available transient room tax, or TRT. By buying down the courthouse debt, it decreases the future year's annual debt service levels. And this does make more TRT funds available that were previously forecasted to be needed for a higher annual debt service. I would just say in the forecast before, those TRT funds didn't meet, in fiscal year 42 or fiscal year 38, whichever option you choose to buy down, TRT was not enough to cover. Now TRT is enough to cover, but despite the increased TRT, the forecast does predict that the vast majority of those funds will be needed for future capital maintenance, minimum capital outlay, and operational subsidies. And if you recall, in the last forecast we did, the general fund kind of loses its ability to contribute to the general reserve by fiscal year 34 with this kind of historical growth assumptions that we're seeing. And so the TRT needs to pick up those historical general fund costs, such as maintenance, outlay, and operational assistance. So that was kind of a big slide there. And will be kind of recurring themes throughout this presentation. Are there any questions?
I have a question about maintenance of the courthouse.
Mhm.
Does the state pick that up?
Maintenance of the courthouse is not even in my model. That's a great question. I just meant general county maintenance.
Okay, I just wanted to know,
But I'm
Barry
sure-
Milstead, who runs Crook County, said, be sure that the state is picking up the maintenance for the courthouse. So I just needed to ask that question.
Mhm.
I think we do it. We've always done the roofs and the everything in our current courthouse. It's our facility.
Well, I'm talking about like maintenance on a like weekly basis, that type of maintenance. Do they maintain it? Who's
would
paying
have
for
to-
that?
I would have to ask Lee. He wants to come on up, Lee.
Oh, now you're part of the presentation.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for being here.
Lee Randall, Facilities Director. Currently, the facility charges are handled like an internal service fund charge, but they are funded by the general fund. So that includes custodial, regular building maintenance, as well as capital maintenance like roofs and other work. And I'm not sure, I'm happy to reach out to Mr. Milstead as well. I'm not sure what mechanism that he's speaking of, but be happy to check into that.
Could you please? Because I just thought that was, he's been working at, I think he just had his last day at the Crook County operations. And he seemed to think that was a really important question to ask, that the state should be picking that up.
So we are working on an agreement for audio visual.
And he said to order everything now because it's
Right.
like 18 months down the road.
Yeah, but we have had an agreement historically on audio visual maintenance and replacement, and we're working on an agreement whereby the state would clearly have that responsibility going forward. So we expect to be back to the board in a few months with that.
Okay.
So one item to highlight on this slide, just to reiterate, is there are two separate yet related issues. One is the funding of the courthouse and how we meet the debt service obligations for that. And the second one is the structural imbalance that we'll get to in the general fund in those out years. And we presented that before, but just a reminder, those two things still exist today in the absence of making some changes. Our long-term forecast for the general fund still crosses the line with our structural imbalance. And so that's why that hasn't changed and that's still there. The reason why we need to draw upon the TRT for these operational assistance, again, it's because it's related when our revenues are less than our expenditures in the general fund. So they're interconnected in that way. And we'll get to that.
Right. Yeah. If our general fund can no longer fund operations, then it has to go to transient room tax to be able to subsidize operations. And as Lee's speaking to with the ISF process, the internal allocations piece, that's a piece that's really hard to capture in a model like this too. As we grow, how much do our ISF grow? A large courthouse, like I said, I haven't even put in the maintenance that we would estimate on that per year. Plus I know our IT department is coming up with new softwares and new needs to be able to support a county of our size. So those are growing issues as well. All right, going forward, we're going to move into the general fund operational forecast. Thank you, Lee. And so just a quick overview for folks, for the public. The general fund is made up of departments, the DA, the clerk, the assessor, the veterans department, tax and property management, the medical examiner, and then transfers out to other departments to support their operations. The largest transfers to other departments are health services and community justice juvenile. And the major source of revenue is still property taxes, but it's also supported through various smaller grants and clerk's office fees. As we know and spoke about before, those fees are declining. Assessors grants are declining as well currently. Departmental expenditures within the general fund are the greatest cost of the fund. And as we talked about briefly, state funding has no effect on the general fund operational forecast. So moving forward, we're going to move into that forecast. It's the same one that we evaluated last time. And so in this forecast, as we discussed, looking at historical growth assumptions and a 4.9% assessed value by FY35, operational expenditure growth surpasses all general fund revenue And what that means is that in FY 35, there's no more general fund, moving into the general reserve. So that's when TRT would have to take on kind of those historical costs the general fund has paid for. The county would take on roughly $700,000 of unfunded operations in fiscal year 36. And by fiscal year 39, just 3 years later, that would grow to about $5 million. So that's kind of what happens when your expenditures cross over your revenue. You take on large deficits quickly and they kind of compound. In this model, by fiscal year 40, the beginning working capital balance is depleted. And so it's very critical to ensure that we continue to have available funds. So operations continue at current service levels. And this is what Robert was talking about. We kind of have this two-pronged thing here. We have, how do we pay for courthouse and future capital? And how do we make sure that we're within budget for general fund operations or have the funds to subsidize those operations?
And it should be pointed out, we pointed out before again, the red bars that are below the zero line, that's not possible, right? You can't go negative in those terms. So what that would mean would actually be that's the amount of cuts in those years if we're unable to structurally balance our budget before that.
And I would just point out that this is a pretty moderate forecast actually right now. We're looking at about the last 7 years of historical expenditures and applying those out. So we have some really low years of CPI in here, and we have some high years of CPI. We have some years where we've had FTE growth and years where we've been, about 4 or 5 years ago, we're pretty stable or even had a decrease in FTE growth. And we take that all into account when we're looking at and creating this model for the future. Going forward onto courthouse funding forecasts here. So just an overview of the courthouse funding that we'll be going over today, kind of in details, the $15 million debt buy down, which aligns with, the state funding we received. The cost estimate is $40.5 million. The buy down of $15 million would be from state funding. It saves approximately $9.2 million in interest costs over the life of the debt service versus no buy down. So there's significant savings there. And it meets the debt service obligations and has approximately actually really closer to $9 million remaining in the general reserve there after the debt service. So that's about 20 years out. So we can think of that as really being closer to $5 to $6 million in today's dollars in terms of reserve in the future. And I think from a fiscal perspective, we often think that it's good to have maybe about $6 million kind of minimum in your general reserve for operational subsidies, especially when we're moving quickly. So this $15 million buy down would kind of leave us right in around that level there. The county would issue full faith and credit bonds for $25.5 million, assuming a true interest cost of 5.075% for 20 years for an annual debt service of approximately $2 million a year and a total debt service of $41 million. And of course, those long-term interest rates might go down. I don't know if Robert wants to speak to that.
Yeah, once we get to hear more from the board about your preference on how much to buy down, then we'll meet with our financial advisor and get some updated numbers on these. The last I talked with him, realistically, we could be looking at, in today's environment, maybe closer to 4.5%, which would help the interest rate and the debt service payment a little bit. But we're still in the general ballpark right now with these estimates here. But of course, we would update those once we move forward with that process.
An annual debt service be total about, like we said, $2 million a year there for 20 years. That would be funded by unallocated transient room tax revenue and remaining general fund revenue, which we have projected through fiscal year 34 before operations eclipse. And then, of course, just monitoring the growth rate in the general fund in general.
So if we're holding a decent amount of money in the general reserve right now, and we could opt to do a bigger buy down than 15 million. I think what we're balancing is, the yields that we would get by holding funds in reserve versus the interest that we, the debt service payments that we would have to make if we bought down less. But can you speak to that a little bit? Is that basically, what we would be considering in making that choice? And do you have any gut feelings about whether it'd be better to buy down more now than not?
Right. Yeah, I did have that conversation with our financial advisor, because now a couple things to keep in mind, and we'll get into actually some of these details later in the presentation. But we don't actually have the $15 million in hand in cash, and it's counted in our reserve numbers right now. When we get to those slides, you'll see it, but we don't actually have the cash yet. We don't know how long that'll take to get there. But I did ask him about that. If we had some cash on hand to buy forward, is it better to get the go now or kind of wait a little bit, see what rates are doing? They would do another analysis once we know some definitive numbers, but their suggestion was to go ahead and move forward with the loan at this point with getting a bond. But they would provide that and give us a more detailed analysis when it came time for us to decide about moving forward as well. But their initial recommendation was, yeah, it's still better financially to go ahead and move forward.
And we have,
I was just going to say, because some of that excess interest that you earn anyway, you have to give back to the federal government, because you're really not allowed to earn over a certain threshold on interest when you borrow funds, because they don't want governments borrowing funds and then investing at a higher rate. They caught up on that one. So that's arbitrage, and that's what we have to monitor along with that as well.
and we do have some recommendations towards the back about the specific amount that we're recommending. And of course, it looks at, how much free cash is available for general fund operations in the future, plus, future inflation and supply chain issues, all those things. Okay, so moving forward, we'll get straight into a forecast comparison. The forecast on the left is what it looked like with no buy down prior to the 15 million. We failed to pay off the debt service in fiscal year 38. The forecast on the right is updated with the $15 million buy down in the state funding. And you can see in FY 45 there, we're able to pay for the courthouse and ending up with about $9 million in reserve balance to pay down. So I guess the only thing we would say about that is that, again, this is not really looking at the general fund operations piece. That reserve is not subsidizing any of the general fund operations piece. This is just really focusing on the ability to pay down the courthouse and capital maintenance and capital operations. And when we'll do our next graph here, we'll actually look at what it looks like if you were to take some of this reserve while you're paying down the courthouse and try to subsidize some of those general fund operations. And is that, something that's fiscally possible with the $15 million that we now have. And so here we're looking at just that, the general fund operations with a subsidy from the general reserve. And this is a comparison. Prior to the $15 million, if you recall on slide 6, the general fund balance, I believe, goes negative in fiscal year 40. In this instance, on the left-hand side, prior to the 15 million, the beginning working balance still goes and kind of goes negative in fiscal year 42. And with the $15 million balance, the beginning working capital for general fund operations still goes negative in fiscal year 43, because the annual gap at that point in time in operations is $13 million annually currently. And, these are our assumptions, and these are what we're looking at with historical expenditure trends. We don't know if we'll receive more revenue in the general fund. We don't know if we'll kind of see reduced CPI for many years. But currently looking at historicals, that's what we're seeing. So the answer is that if we were trying to fund both this kind of operational issue and this courthouse, we would not be able to do both of them. It would fail either in 42 or 43 under the current assumptions. So we still kind of have that issue to work through.
Can you remind me what, in terms of our annual general fund revenue, what kind of assumptions we have for both the increase in assessed value per property and the number of properties that are paying property taxes?
Yeah. So from a model perspective, I don't think we've looked at the number of properties or the ability of the expansion of the UGB or something like that, but we have looked at, what's a typical urban what's the urban, like a large growing urban 20-year forecast. And I believe I presented in my last one, I don't want to mess up the number, but it's less than what we put in our model. I think it was around 4% We have an AV growth of 4.9% over 20 years, which is the current growth that we budgeted in fiscal year 24. We feel like it might be a little high, maybe even that 4.9. But that's what we have for revenue. Other revenues, substantial revenues would be the clerk's fees and the assessor's grants, and we have those growing by about 2.5% per year. I did do a lot of research into what is a 20-year, but there's really nobody like Deschutes County that's had kind of the 20-year growth in Oregon. And it really is kind of a question of how much more expansion is there. It felt like 4.9% was certainly an increase from what we originally started these projections with, which was closer to 4.2%.
Because, the community development department is working with these figures that there are going to be 300,000 people in Deschutes County in 2040. So I don't know how that matches up with the, the growth in the growth in number of properties that you're assuming, but I'd be interested to, just know that we're kind of accounting for anticipated future growth, but B, also, as you were saying, being conservative about that.
Right.
And we do have to continue to look more at a macro level as well. And that's where, as you know, the 4.9 is higher than the standard 3% that it naturally goes up. So there's that built-in 1.9% increase over 20 years.
Right.
But the other thing we don't know, and the reason part of the challenge, we can't look by property. We don't know how much are, as you know, incremental tax incentives, if they're not on the tax rolls for 10 years or 20 years. And so that while population may be added, yet population or the tax benefit to the general fund may not happen for 10 years in that. So looking at it property by property would be a lot, but that's why we have to take more of a macro view.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not asking you to count exactly how many properties are going to be with 300,000 people, but
no, and I think, our highest AV growth has been somewhere in the range of 5.5. So obviously higher than 4.9. I think looking out from a conservative point of view, it would be hard to say that might last for 20 years. I don't have a crystal ball. Feel like that's what Scott, our assessor, would say. But 4.9 we felt like but we can definitely look into it again and say, hey, what was the rate? We doubled at this point in time. And is that comparable to what we're projecting? Certainly. So moving forward, we're going to jump straight into the available funds forecast, which is really all the forecast. So this forecast is going to show all the available funds by source, before buy down, annual debt service, and before capital needs. And so in fiscal year 24, you can see that light blue bar at the bottom is prior year and current year general fund. It's about $6 million. In the past, that bar has been everything that's been in the general reserve. It's been used to pay for all of our county courthouse capital needs, besides a few pieces that we took out of debt service. It's been as high as $12 million and it's been as low as 1.9, where we needed to add some TRT to it. The prior and current year TRT in there is about $5.4 million. That includes $1.9 million that we've budgeted in Fund 463 for starting debt service this year. So we're looking at, if we start debt service in fiscal year 25, we're actually looking at holding on to that $1.9 million for future buy down. We have some LATCF funding in there, a very small portion of ARPA and PILT. And then of course, we've added the $15 million of state funding here. And all these funds, again, are available funds shown after operations, but prior to coverage of buy down, of debt service, and of maintenance and capital needs, which typically run us fairly high. Usually the flow of funds are those excess funds flow into general reserve. And then we spend out $1 million something in capital maintenance. Perhaps we have capital projects that we spend $1 million something on. And then debt service and buy down, of course, as well. TRT. And then so we haven't actually, as Robert spoke to, received the $15 million. So we will be doing a budget adjustment before it's reflected, and we'll recognize that revenue and place it in this fund for future use.
So a couple other comments on this slide. So this kind of is referencing, again, that first bar graph for fiscal year 24. It looks like we have a lot of funds on hand already, but again, as Dan, and we keep mentioning that Brown 15 million, we haven't actually received yet. So we don't have that yet. And the 4.6 million of Lactive, we have received, but it's dedicated, previously discussed, dedicating that to the courthouse. The main point on this is the lightest blue on the bottom. That's the regular standard amount of reserve we would transfer in. You could see those, as the years go across, the reserve number is below $5 million at 4, and even at 4 million at times. We've stated previously, really a $6 million reserve per year is best where we feel comfortable with. So even with these reserves forecasted out based on our revenues and expenditures, how much we could transfer into reserve, this is lower than what we feel comfortable with. So that would mean the current year reserve is needed to help kind of smooth those out in years, but it's this year's reserve is not reflective of what we have in each of the coming years, because these were part of the one-time discussions decisions we made at the budget committee meeting.
And just to piggyback on that, I'd say this is what we expect as an annual contribution into the reserve before some of those. If you look at a year like fiscal year 39, you'll see the general fund that orange bar has gone off because of operations, and we just have TRT. Fiscal year 39 looks like there's about $4 million in forecasted available funds to be transferred into the general reserve. But on the graph you'll see later, there's about $5 million in minimal expenditures we would expect from capital maintenance and capital needs. So even though these would be available funds going into the reserve, they'd then be going out plus $1 million of the balance to pay for capital needs and debt service.
So this shows the available revenue coming in before we start talking about our commitments for what we've committed for going out as well. And Dan will get to those.
Commissioner Chang, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
So here we're going to see the available funds forecast with the $15 million buy down, obviously cumulative. So this forecast shows available funds by source from a cumulative perspective. You can see we're expecting that one-time state funding of 15 million, that red bar. And really the only funds we're expecting to grow at this point are the transient room tax funds having some left over. You'll see that orange bar eventually maxes out in fiscal year 34 and stays constant. That's our general fund. And so all revenue sources total $123 million. Again, this is before capital maintenance and debt. Moving forward, we're going to start talking about those expenditures against those available funds. And so those are going to be our debt and capital expenditure forecast by fiscal year. This forecast does show the courthouse debt buy down, then shows the subsequent debt service by year, the minimum capital maintenance and capital projects expenditures by year. You'll see that large blue bar there is, of course, the one-time, in this case, $15 million buy down. And then the other commitments. Let's go over those real quick because we just made some of those commitments. And today, hopefully, we'll get some motions on where those are coming from. The yellow bar, that small yellow bar in fiscal year 24, that's $500,000 for the Housing Trust Fund. We have looked at sources of revenue, and we believe the general fund is the only one that can fund that at this point in time, given the AMI status and the video lottery can't fund those. So in fiscal year 25, there's $1.5 million in that yellow bar, and that goes to the Terrebonne sewer system, which was approved a while ago, but we have not allocated any direct funds to it. That's $1 million. And 500,000 again to the Housing Trust Fund in fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 27, there's $300,000 in that yellow bar. And that would be for $100,000 for Veterans Village operations. We have a 10-year commitment to fund $100,000 per year to Veterans Village. And then another 200,000. I'll have to look up that 200,000, but we have that. Oh, that's for, ongoing coordinated houseless response. We have an obligation to keep that program going. And so we put an estimate of $200,000 a year. And so those numbers continue out through FY29. And then in FY30 and 31, kind of the remaining years of Veterans Village funding from that 100,000. Going forward, we have the cumulative. And so this forecast shows all the accumulation of the courthouse buy down, the annual debt service, and the minimum capital projects, as well as the other commitments that we made here recently. All expenditures total $115 million. This does not include the general fund unfunded operations after fiscal year 34. So again, we looked at that graph earlier, where if you tried to take some of the reserves that you see and put it into general fund operations, can you cover both the operations and the courthouse debt? At this point, with the current assumptions, we don't believe that you could. It would not work in fiscal year 43. So that leaves us with the actual graph here of the reserve balance. Again, this is the overlay of the cumulative funds versus cumulative expenditures after you've paid for all those debt service obligations and capital maintenance. You do have approximately $9 million remaining, around $5 to $6 million in today's dollars, which we believe kind of is a good bare minimum to have for the general fund at this point in time. It does not include or address the general fund unfunded operations after fiscal year 30 or 34. So the good news is, we're able to pay for the courthouse and some capital maintenance. Perhaps an issue to continue to look at is kind of the rise in operational increases. And so going straight from there, we're actually going to talk about some of the other priorities and future county priorities not included in the projections. We have increased operational subsidies, and I'm just going to ask that we kind of look at that handout that I sent. Increased operational subsidies to multiple departments outside of the general fund who are currently facing declining revenues. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about CDD, but the sheriff's office had an opportunity to meet with some folks in the business management area of the sheriff's office, and they're looking at potentially $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million being down starting, fiscal year 25 in operations. I think we need to adult parole and probation. They presented at budget committee. They're looking at potentially $1 million starting in FY 26 or end of FY 25, increasing their general fund operations. And obviously these are all revenue subsidies. We're not talking about the expenditure piece of this. But these are just things that you may want to consider to have funds for in the future. And recently speaking to health services, they predict that their public health operations in fiscal year 26. Remember, public health operations is not privy to the behavioral health reserve they have, would need substantial boost too in the seven figures there, the low seven figures. And so these are early projections for some of these folks, but these are just places where we continue to see operational growth. The Justice Court Victims Assistance needs general fund or TRT transfers every year, and we expect those to increase as well. I've put on here stability of the health benefits fund. Our claims cost, as everyone knows, has gyrated a lot. It's mostly gone up lately. And we're trying to align premiums, but we may need to have like a small amount to cover if it goes over contingency. You can always pay it back in the future, but and then large capital projects that we currently probably are not seeing revenue for, the public safety campus improvements and other space needs. And so those are just some of the things on the list of future operations to remember. And as we move forward, I'm going to go here real quick. This was that original graph that I showed you. This graph does not take into account, I just think it should be noted, it doesn't take into account kind of what adult parole and probation has been talking about. It doesn't take into account maybe a subsidy or more funds moving towards the sheriff's office. It doesn't take into account more funds for public health. It does to some degree, right? We have that annual increase of 4 or 5%, but not what we call like stepwise functions. It's a curved, smooth function where we just take the historical growth, we smooth it out. A stepwise has jumps to it. And we're seeing 3 or 4 departments right now that are talking about potentially having jumps in funding of $1 million plus. And so if that was to come to fruition, then we're not taking that into account with excess general fund dollars that we have into fiscal year 34. And so we have added those operations to the priority list just for folks to be aware of. And again, there's obviously two solutions. You find new revenue, you get new grants, or we hold on to revenue for future operational subsidy, or we cut expenditures, materials and services, or whatnot to make sure that we align with a balanced budget.
And it must be noted, this isn't an exclusive or inclusive list of items. These are just financial fiscal issues that we've been hearing about out of the department. So Dan's been making note of it, or admin's been hearing. There could be more, like I said, so it's not an exhaustive list. It's just ones that are coming to the forefront. And this forecast also does not include any outside contributions to other agencies that may be asking that, where it only can come from general fund or from our general fund reserves. So it doesn't take any outside assistances into account as well.
Mhm. All right, so courthouse buy down options here. To put it simply, the kind of courthouse buy down options are a little bit like when you're putting down deposit on a new house. You know, if you deposit or buy down less in the beginning, you will have more funds available for current operations and board priorities. But if you put down more, if you buy down more, you're going to have less funds available now, but you'll save money in the long term for the future county. So lower interest costs over the long term, leading to significantly more savings for future operations and board priorities. And on this next slide, we'll get into kind of the compare and contrast, and you guys definitely, this will help, I hope, with the direction that the board would like to give. There we go. So with the 15 million, you're saving approximately 9 million in interest costs. With a $20 million buy down, you're saving about 12 million in interest costs. And with a $25 million, you're saving about $15 million in interest costs.
Robert, do you think if we do the 20 million down because we're borrowing a smaller amount, does that affect the interest rate at all?
No, the amount won't affect the interest rate typically. It could if we did bank qualified amount is, which is a term, it's something they use, but there's a $10 million bank qualified, which kind of is a different threshold, but it would be a competitive bid in any rate, whether we're going out for 15, 20 or 25.
Okay.
The difference here is if you look at that second bullet point, what are you starting your general reserve with right now? $16.2 million with 15 million, $11.2 million with 20 million, and with 25 million, only $6.2 million in our reserves. In all cases, they complete the debt service and complete the courthouse. And as we talked about home buying, if you do the 25 million, you'll finish with, $5 to $6 million more in the reserves than if you were to do the 15 million, but that's over a 20-year period. And there's a lot of, variables in there that we just can't predict or see. So with 15 million, after looking at this for a long time, we think we can potentially accommodate $3 to $5 million in total in short-term priorities within the next few years. So that's not $3 to $5 million a year. With the current revenue, it would be $3 to $5 million in maybe 3 years. But on the flip side of that, you would deplete the ending reserves of $9 million to about $4 million. But we understand that there's certainly potentially operational issues or capital issues coming up. And so it's nice to have some of those funds on hand to deal with those issues now. If you were to buy down 20 million with what we look at long term, you might have only closer to $1 to $3 million in short-term priorities within the next few years. And that would reduce the reserves from 11.2 to $8.2 million. We actually don't, after looking at this for a while, it's hard to recommend a $25 million buy down at this point in time due to the lower starting balance of $6.2 million in reserves, given some of the operational things that we might be seeing, given some of whatever priorities that may come up to the board that haven't come up now that might be urgent. This just really doesn't leave you with very much funds to commit to anything. And of course, we have that health benefits fund as well. And just, so it's a little bit of a low starting balance, I guess. And so those are kind of the 3 options that we looked at. After looking at those, we'll go to our courthouse buy down options. With the information currently available, staff recommend exploring a minimum buy down of $15 million with an optimal amount closer to 20 million. 20 million does allow some additional future interest savings of $12 million. And it also leaves a limited amount of reserve funds for internal operations, $1 to $3 million over the next 3 years. Plus, we may have video lottery funds. Plus, we may have video lottery funds as well. And unexpected, and so it helps for unexpected financial situations and board priorities. If a roof doesn't collapse, but if there's, leaking or something like that. Lee's like,
Please,
no.
Dad.
Yeah.
Even though we had a lot of snow.
The ceiling.
Unexpected.
Not while the facility director is in the room, right? No. But we do think that 25 million, does not leave an adequate short-term reserve with the prospect of increasing future operational subsidies. When we look at this list, there's a lot of things. There's some things on here that aren't even here. The Sun River ask of TRT potentially, and we haven't reached out to all departments to hear where their pinpoints might be as well. So.
And this is really a starting point, a discussion point for the Board of Commissioners to consider. There's obviously options here. If we did the 25 million, then it would be, there wouldn't be funding available, as Dan just mentioned, for any unknown internal expenditures. There wouldn't be funding for any external expenditures. It's also the trade-off that the board has to consider, as well as, again, during the budget committee, when we talked about what are some funding options for the courthouse, how to buy down that debt. And we came up with some good options. Some of that will be used within this, wherever we end up within the buy down. But then some of those funds are also needed just to build up the reserves, because our reserves have gotten low, and to meet our financial commitments that we've recently made or that we may want to make. So not all of it will be available for the courthouse, because we have other funding that we have already committed to as well. So it's part of, that's why we wanted to present it, open up the discussion for your preference as well. And Nick.
Well, it's just are the numbers here, when we talk about short-term priorities in the 3 to 5 or 1 to 3 million, et cetera, does that include these numbers, or that would be these numbers?
So the numbers include
Is it on-
everything that's approved, everything that has a yes on the approvals. It doesn't include anything after Central Oregon Guardians to fair and capital needs. So all those are not included. And that's why it's difficult to recommend the fiscal year 25, because all of these the pay down of 25 million, because they're not included.
We just included the items the board expressed interest in supporting or made motions to support already.
Okay,
in the
that's
forecast.
super helpful, just to know that these short-term board priorities are accounted for. This is in addition. They would have the additional 3 to 5 or 1 to 3. Okay.
And they're
Maybe
mostly
that's
accounted.
clear, and I just wasn't.
Right. And they're mostly accounted for with ARPA dollars.
Right.
Most of these. And so are there any questions from the board before we move on to the next slide? Just some considerations for the board. As we move forward with this process, not committing future TRT without substantial additional revenues or expenditure reductions. One of the reasons we have that in here is last couple of months, I think we've seen a 30% decrease in TRT. This model right here has us at $12.6 million next year and growing by 2.5%. Okay, so the model is it really much, it does depend on our TRT to some degree. And so we want to try to continue to be conservative with that, but we're seeing TRT down farther than we expected to see it. And we're hoping that doesn't trend too far into fiscal year 25, 26. You don't want to have a reset to fiscal year 2019. That would be a significant gap. So we don't see that we have any TRT available. Obviously, we have a little bit in our reserve to pay for Sun River, but even that's a little bit less than the 2 million that's needed at this point in time.
So how soon will we know the June's TRT number?
We should get that in the next, couple weeks for sure.
How long? Okay. I mean, I was thinking okay, I know it went down 6 months in a row. Did it go down 7?
We don't have those numbers yet.
And the real June, does that come in August?
Yeah.
Because
The real
what
June.
we report in June is based on May's.
Yes, I know. There's a delay.
So again, it's speaking to kind of the general fund operations, just slowing the operational growth countywide and within the general fund until inflation decreases and projected assessed value growth of property tax returns to higher levels. And that's what Commissioner Chang was talking about is that 4.9, and we'll do some more research to see if that's an appropriate assessed value or if we can bump it up. We do recommend buying down 20 million down in courthouse debt to save on financing costs and ensure future financial reserves. It's just kind of as a balance between needs now and needs and savings later. And then identifying available funding prior to making financial commitments. We're tighter than we've been in a while. Obviously not as tight with this $15 million. We're very happy and thankful for that. But it's always good to identify the funding prior to, and due to volatility, possibly avoiding multi-year financial commitments until we can identify multi-year funding to ensure that we can pay those.
And just a couple other comments on this, just to help the board out a little bit. One thing we've been talking about and working with admin on is when there's board agenda items, how can we expand upon that budget section or budget impact, fiscal impact statements, so that before items even come to you, especially if someone's coming and asking for a request, where are the identified funds? What's the funding source for that? So it doesn't have to happen during the, in the middle, or you don't have to make a commitment before you even know what the funds are coming from. And then for the bottom item, avoiding multi-year financial commitments, that's just similar to and again, not judging the value of decisions, but it's from a fiscal perspective. It's like we feel much more comfortable on a fiscal basis, having the funds in reserve or available prior to committing them for multi-year, similar to the TRT tax as the commitment to Sun River on how we have, we're down $1 million in our current year. So the next year has to make up for that. So this forecast does include 1.9 million transferring over to the reserve. But if we're down $1 million, now we're already short of $1 million, right? So that would mean we'd have less in that forecast. So it all impacts the other because it's related. So really thinking about, let's not make commitments until we actually have them from the fiscal perspective.
And the other impact that I really have to mention is that North County project that did not get properly allocated. I believe we picked up the 911. They paid for something, but we really picked up the purchase price, I believe, and then Mosaic Medical too. We don't have a consistent policy here. Did that building, I know we spent 4.65 million on it, but what are we up at now? Like 13 million? Some big number, Dan. What is it? No, it's a really big number. And I'm not sure if the county should have been responsible for that entire number.
Well, and
So we need consistency.
I think one thing that we've definitely looked at is, I think, and maybe Robert can speak to this with Lane, is departments, if we give general fund, departments usually pay rent on an internal building, just like they pay rent on an external building, basically paying that back. I don't know.
So are you saying the 911 is going to pay to be there?
I'm saying that maybe we haven't always done that in the past.
Okay, well, I'm saying, are they now going to pay to be there though?
I don't know. I'd have to.
Right, exactly.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Are they though?
All the funding. I don't recall.
I don't know offhand.
Going forward, and who's going to be there and all the improvements and everything else, but
So we don't have a policy in place, speaking to what Robert brought up, for various departments to pay an additional amount toward a building that was purchased with cash. So buildings where they've been financed, there have been various arrangements where departments pay that financing over time. So South County is still being paid off in that way. Health services buildings in the past were purchased in that manner, where health services paid the debt service over time. The current amount, total amount all in for North County is 11.25 million. The board recently approved the additional remodel space. That's an additional 500,000. That's being funded directly by health services. And then the 911 portion of the remodel projects are being funded directly by 911.
But not the purchase, because it was with cash?
Correct. In this case, an arrangement wasn't made for 911 to contribute to that purchase. Various other departments, when we had when the cost increased over the original budgeted construction amount, that was divided among various departments. So public health is contributing to that total 11.5 million for portion of 236, and various other departments that'll be in that building are contributing a portion of the amount that went over the original budget estimate. So there's some additional contributions coming from departments that are incorporated into that total.
We just need to be consistent. I do believe.
Yeah, we'll be looking at policies and to Dan's point, what I've seen before other organizations, correct, if you're paying for a building, then, that's your contribution. If you're paying for the debt service, once that's done, there's a lot of times called a facility use fee where you continue to charge departments for that. Those funds either go into a maintenance fund or it also goes into a continual operating fund. And it's part of your internal service costs where based on square footage, you get charged a rate, and that's how you contribute, whether you initially paid for the building yourself or we're financing it, but everyone contributes.
And our maintenance fund is funded by 3 cents of property tax plus general fund and fund excess. And so that's another reason why that would occur. Well, thanks, Lee. So on to the recommendations and motions, as we stated, we kind of recommend looking at buying down $20 million in courthouse debt to save on financing costs and ensure future financial reserves over the next few years. We do anticipate that would leave $1 to $3 million or so total for the next 3 years for kind of additional allocations that aren't covered on this sheet. We recommend if you did want to go with the 20 million using all of the LATC funds, TCF funds, the $4.622 million, and of course the $15 million from the state, and approximately 380,000 in general reserves for the purposes of buying down the courthouse debt. We also recommend using ARPA funds on any eligible commitment so that other revenue funds are not impacted. So just to go over what we could use ARPA funds for, we think we could use ARPA funds. We know that we could for Veterans Village operations of $100,000 annually, but only through fiscal year 26. And we have to obligate them by the end of fiscal year 24. The Veterans Village cabin expansion of 300,000 we believe to be eligible. We could do fiscal year 26 coordinated houseless response office ongoing operations. We have approximately 200,000 there. And so I believe that grant ends in 25, I think. So we could probably fund that in 26, but then 27, 28, those would have to be funded out of a different source. Also the remaining ARPA balance of 500,000 towards Terrebonne sewer, which is projected, they're projected to need that money in early fiscal year 25. So it's certainly an obligation we could do now, but there's also been some conversations about using some additional PILT potentially to fund some of that as well, but it's kind of early in that. And then consider the utilization of ARPA contingencies for eligible future investments. We obviously have contingencies in 2 great programs too, public health and workforce. But if there is a priority that's more important to the board, then potentially moving those contingencies over as well.
I have a question about Terrebonne sewer. Those funds came from Senator Bonham's ARPA to Terrebonne that we chose to give to the sewer. So has that money not been set aside? I mean, that's been with our you're saying that's with our ARPA funding?
As far as I know,
Because that was specifically for Terrebonne.
Right. I think he allocated $1 million and we also allocated $1 million.
Okay, so this is our million then?
Mhm.
Okay, good. All right, because I knew his was specifically for Terrebonne.
Dan, as you wrap up here, I just want to, because we're presenting the board with this information this afternoon, if the board's not in a position to make recommendations or motions today, we can come back next week or in the following weeks. I just don't want the board to feel like you need to make these decisions today. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is a lot.
No, I think the 20 million to the courthouse is exactly what we should do. So thank you for recommending that.
Sure. And then $500,000 from the general fund in support of the Housing Trust and Affordable Housing. So that was recently done, a 2-year commitment of 500,000. Right now, we only see general fund available for that. So as there's already been a motion for that, that's where the funding would come from. And
But
then
you're saying we really don't have that funding.
we do have it in general reserve. I mean, like I spoke to, we have, it would just come out of general reserve. So that when we're talking about maybe having $1 to $3 million total over 300,000 years, or sorry, over
Yeah,
3 years.
get real.
It's getting late for me too. Over 3 years, we have included this as coming out of the general fund already. So we've already factored in that this $1 million is going to come from the general fund. So we do have those funds. I would say if that hadn't been approved, then we would have just said $2 to $4 million on a 20-year. But and then of course, it sounded like there was support for the Central Oregon Guardians. So $100,000 from the general fund and one-time support of Central Oregon Guardians. Doesn't seem to be ARPA eligible. Calling out a specific population such as the elderly is not necessarily ARPA eligible. There might be portions of it. And I spoke with Health Services about, can you guys fund this? Because they were supportive of it. And they said they might be small portions of it that they could fund that are related to their clients. But there's also going to be people that are not going to be in their program. And it'd be really hard to pull those out. So we're just recommending, if there's support for that, $100,000 from the general fund.
One last, or I won't say last, another important point, tagging on to that is, as Dan talks about having that amount, a few million over a period, when community members come and ask for one-time requests or ongoing requests, we don't have specific budget for that. And as you know, that's why, like, I think the board referenced, or someone referenced, well, we missed the city of Bend's opportunity, they have it once per year, right? And we are kind of more open, and it happens during the year, but we still just have this pot of money. We don't have budgets for it per se. Any request always comes out of our reserves. So as our reserves continue to shrink, that's why we want to try to provide more information to the board up front about any additional requests, if we know in advance, to help provide that guidance. So it's reducing the reserves. And then if something happens, well, this is the amount of money we have left. So we want to try to be helpful and provide.
Well, I just think it's incredibly important, that Veterans Project, to get that funded so that they can build those cabins now and they can be ready in November. And the fact that this statement from May 9th said we had $465,000 in returned ARPA money, I felt like that was something really the county can step up and do. We have over 17,000 veterans, and we have homeless veterans.
And that's why these are proposed to use some ARPA funds for that.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And we do have $1.478 million in ARPA, and that includes all return funds, OSU, plus projects that are finished under budget, plus our ARPA balance. So that's kind of the total amount that we have. And that's why we were recommending using at least the ARPA balance to kind of fund the Veteran Village projects and maybe the Coordinated Homeless Response Office in fiscal year 26, if that's an obligation we have, and potentially the Terrebonne sewer. So, and then in fiscal year 27, once ARPA's ended, we'll have to fund the Veterans Villages operations out of some other funding source.
We're talking 100,000 a year, unless.
Yeah. Right. General fund, TRT. Are there any questions? Like Nick said, it's obviously a lot of information to digest. So if you want to give us direction or go through motions, we're happy with that. Or if you want us to come back specifically for a more detailed session on that, we can do that too.
Well, I'll make a motion today. I don't know if anyone will second it, but to do as staff recommended, to put down 20 million for the courthouse.
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'm just kind of processing. So, I mean, we're making a motion today to give us a kind of a stake in the ground, saying, okay, this is the cash portion. Now that'll give you guidance to go talk to bonding and funding people.
Yeah, the other part of that we'll need to wait on is we'll need to wait for the agreement from the state as well. And that kind of went to the question to Doug Riggs the other day, as far as, well, if it's general. fund, is it just like here, use it, or if it's comes from the normal bond funding, then it's, well, you can pay for a certain percentage of courthouse, the state portion of the courthouse expenses. Again, like you said, we shouldn't have any problem, but we'll know more about the strings that are attached with that funding. So will we get it up front? Is it on a reimbursement basis? We don't know some of those things. So, but this is all feeding into those decisions. And obviously we would come back to the board with a resolution before we ever went out for a bond to say, yes, this is the amount, and you would have to authorize that for us. But this would give us the planning, another planning tool. So we're ready once we get that information from the state.
So then is it by committing to 20 million now, we're talking about committing to 20.5 in bonding?
That would be correct.
And what time frame on? Well, as I said, yeah, there's a motion, and I was just kind of trying to think through.
Speaking, I don't know that it would be a commitment. It would be a motion for us to go seek out what those rates would be and how much that would be annualized, and to do the analysis on that. There'd be a resolution that would.
Yeah, the resolution would give the final authority, on the bonding. That is true. One other thing, typically bonds, if it's a 20-year bond, usually there's within 10 years, if you had funds available, you could buy down, you could buy off, pay off the bonds early. There's some stipulations there, potentially even refinance if rates got lower. But there are some options later, but we would have to know and come back for the board later on exactly how much we are going off our bond for. But this would give us direction at this point if the board chose to do this.
So then,
Is this building paid for in 32? What year is this building paid for? Does anybody?
32 seems close.
I don't know. It's just. Okay, I mean, I was just thinking, okay, if this building is paid for and the state is still paying their portion, then that's going to help quite a bit, isn't
It's
it?
in the general fund model that I have.
Yeah. I would think so.
it's already in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like
I don't
Yeah.
recall off the
That
top of my
wasn't
head,
missed.
but
No,
the
but I
funds
meant-
fall back.
Yeah, it's
Right.
got to help.
It does help.
Well, as I say, there's a motion in a second, just kind of going back and forth here. Any other discussion?
That's just giving direction to kind of work around that 20 million number. It's the resolution, for the actual bond financing will come later. So it's-
Yeah, a lot more paperwork to
Yeah.
follow.
it's- I feel like that's just kind of setting parameters so that.
Right.
that Robert. and
They don't go out and buy something.
Can do.
Yeah.
Can do the work that they need to do to get that all lined out.
And to be clear as well, so the 20 million would commit the 4.6 of LACTIV funds and about 400,000 of general fund reserve coming in. So that's where that funding, where we'd anticipate that, how to get to the 20 million in addition to the state funding.
So one of my thoughts is I think this is it's a little conservative, as in I have a hunch we could come up with a couple more $1 million. Like from that 20 to 25 range, I bet I'm just big statement here, but there's money in there, and this is generally a conservative starting point. So but I'm supportive. So any other discussion? We'll just seeing none. Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. So as I say, that's a point in time now. Let's start with the $20 million number. This weekend, I was asking my wife for a $20 bill, and now we come in here and talk $20 million. Amazing. So yeah, are you looking for any other?
I like Nick said, it's a lot to digest. I do think the one that would be, maybe we can come back and talk about it as a separate ARPA. But I do think the one that would be pretty easy is there was a commitment of $500,000 per year to the Housing Trust Fund, and don't see any other available funds besides general funds. So not sure that
Doing the business of making that.
Yeah, maybe just the FY24 motion coming from the general fund, that would be, and that's where we plugged it into this model as well. So of course we can wait on that motion too, but there was a motion in support of that $1 million.
So remember, yeah, I tried not to do it for multiple years. I mean, I didn't support that, so I may be in a no still, but just trying to not commit to next year's funds. So you're saying just vote for this year's funds out of the $500,000 commitment.
Right.
Would be a
Motion was for $1 million, but you don't need to necessarily do the motion for multiple years, right? the 500,000. And it wasn't ARPA eligible because of that AMI from 80 to 120. That was the
That is
workforce.
the area.
Yeah, and we looked at it and it wasn't video lottery eligible. So that's kind of, and we don't have TRT funds. So that's how we kind of came up with general fund.
So video lottery eligible, is it pretty clear on that, or is it? I mean, who makes that decision? As in, those seem to be some of the most flexible dollars we have. Emergency food, clothing, and shelter is one of the things I think that we can be investing in. So
We can look into, again, I thought I was fairly sure it was certain, but if we'd want to take it back, we can always come back with this motion and just verify.
I thought you looked at that already.
I mean, it's legal's position that it does not qualify for video lottery funds.
I didn't like the answer, but I asked twice.
We could ask a third time.
And I
Find it
believe,
legal.
I believe the answer. I don't like the answer, but I'll accept it.
Understood.
And that's the housing that really is needed, that 80 to, 100 yeah, that AMI is desperately needed. So isn't that sad that it can't be eligible?
Yeah, it's been tough. We've had a lot of workforce housing proposals for ARPA, but they just aren't meeting that 80% AMI, most disproportionately impacted population.
Okay.
But we've made a lot of great affordable housing investments, though, I should say, with ARPA for that population of 80% AMI and under as well. Millions of dollars of investments.
And we receive TRT revenue monthly, but we're ending the fiscal, we ended last fiscal year so far short of our budgeted amount that it'll take a couple of months, probably at least, to even just get us whole for last year. Our commitments from last year. Is that kind of the is when you say there is no TRT?
Right. We had
is that the way to think
budgeted
about it?
Right. We had budgeted 13.6, and I think we're going to come in around $12.5 million. And if you adjust we have a reserve, we should have a reserve of $2 million for Sun River, and we're kind of right there at that $2 million level. So we had budgeted in fiscal year 24 to have $700,000 in TRT, but now that we're looking at where the TRT is coming in this fiscal year, it's going to drop our beginning working capital so much that we won't have that 700,000. So technically speaking, we don't have any TRT currently right now, except for the 2 million in reserve, which is probably a little bit less than that now with the beginning working capital, but that is reserved for that Sun River commitment. So.
The one other piece that sounded fairly discretionary was the interest from the ARPA funds, and where is that sitting right now? And would there be any advantages to using that instead of the general fund?
I mean, I would have to look at our budget week decisions. I forget if we moved that into, I believe that's still sitting in Fund 200, which is our ARPA fund. I think it's about 400,000 to ARPA interest. Last we looked, and this came up recently, does not have strings attached to it. So we could certainly fund a portion of it out of the ARPA interest. That's a good point.
Well, there was a commitment made during budget week to where those funds, I think it went to the reserve fund to help pay down the debt, but I want to make sure.
It was to go to the courthouse.
Yeah.
So it went into that general fund.
It was supposed to go to the courthouse.
So it's already been moved there.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about using general fund or general fund reserve,
Mm-hmm.
we're still talking about that money. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So are we going to need to move some money to the health benefit fund then?
We don't know.
We won't know till September?
We'll have to be monitoring it very closely. I mean, we just did a $5 million contingency adjustment, but the hope is that the health benefits fund budgeted enough to cover their claims costs next year, but we are going to be looking at the trend from month one, which is hard to do, but we need to do it.
Yeah, it can be like last year. We've got to stay on top of that.
And we are, charging departments for filled FTE now. And so we think the contingency with what we're charging will get us closer to about $3 million. So, there's $5 million contingency adjustment this year, but I think we did budget higher and speaking with Kathleen for fiscal year 24. So
Like 1985, I believe, per person or something.
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing that, but we're not doing unfilled, correct? Because that was going to be too impactful on some of our departments. All right. That seemed a bit unfair.
And that speaks to the point, that's why we feel comfortable with a $6 million reserve level minimum. It's for those unknowns and for the internal, having funding available when we have to help out another fund or support a board priority that we can't do without that service of our core services that we need to provide.
or a capital
Yeah. Or
maintenance
capital.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't, it's hard to,
Unforeseen capital.
hard to forecast for capital maintenance every year. Yeah.
Did you want any other motions?
Yeah, if there, well, I mean, I didn't know if we were doing the supported housing. If we could
Yeah,
bring
it's
it
our
back.
motion for the.
Or just the
housing trust,
500,000?
affordable housing.
Yeah,
You want to
it's-
do a one motion and you're eliminating the motion we made last week? Is that what you're
I
saying?
think it was to be determined. The amount was mentioned, but to be determined where it's coming from.
Understanding the board made a commitment, but where the funding came from
Okay.
is unknown, so we're coming back with an option to.
Okay, so I will make the motion then for the housing trust fund to be funded 500,000 from general fund for 1 year for this next fiscal 2024 fiscal year.
To clarify that, we'll just take that out of the general fund portion of the general reserve. So
I'll second that.
So it's been motioned and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes.
great.
And as I say, I voted no previously, but let's fund it now.
Well, this is good. We'll see if it's actually, if something positive happens with it, and then we'll know where
Well, as
we're
I
at.
say, I mean, we're spending money. This is general fund buying houses. Philosophically, it's like buying yourself a job, and it's just scary at some point. So this is a shame, but it could be really exciting getting these houses on, but that's a shame we're coming out of the general fund. Okay.
Okay, as Dan mentioned, we'll come back at some point for all the ARPA items and for the veteran services and the CHRO too, so we can get those committed at later dates as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. So that's the end of our regular agenda. We do have an executive session for the end. Is there any other items? Probably nice and hot outside. Thanks for being flexible to start a 1 o'clock meeting today. So it's nice to be inside. How were the fireworks last night? Did you see them in Bend? A couple people? Yep. I saw them in La Pine. They were pretty amazing. Did you see fireworks?
Somebody set them off right by my house.
Oh.
My dog started barking.
Yeah, I did.
Jake
Different.
went
Yep,
crazy
at home.
and
Yep.
it's just like, oh gosh, let's hope the horses aren't running through the fence.
Okay. Well, we were out in the field, right by where they were shooting them off in La Pine, and it was just amazing. So. Okay. Anything else? Seeing none, we'll go to an executive session under labor. 1926602D.